ставши на коліно, своє полкове знамено, дивлюсь на нього я востаннє, у нез'ясованій журбі, всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі, всю кров мою,
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні. У нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, та вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 285 of the news and another day of fundraising for Ukraine. Tonight, it is World Central Kitchen.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, not on day 284, but day 285. And we have a fundraiser because it is the Sunday fundraiser night. Let's go! Of course, tonight's fundraiser is for World Central Kitchen, a fundraiser that a load of y'all have asked for, and also a fundraiser that has done incredible work inside of Ukraine and all around the world. It was started off by some pretty, I guess you could say, high-up French chefs. I believe they have Michelin stars, if I'm correct, Matthew.
They do. Very good chefs.
And they're incredible chefs, and they have an incredible nonprofit. During the entirety of the war, World Central Kitchen has been out there on the front lines with the soldiers and the citizens, feeding as many of them as they can, and they've even come under direct fire themselves. If y'all remember back during the Kramatorsk railway station attack, about 2 weeks later, a World Central Kitchen rail car and rail consist would be hit by Russian artillery and it would be destroyed. And so World Central Kitchen has not only been helping out Ukraine to massive degrees, but they've been putting themselves in a huge deal of danger just trying to feed these people. And I find it to be a fundraiser that is incredibly well worthwhile. Now, you all know that we've got to do it. I've got to do it at least. I've got to put in my $100 for the Sunday night fundraiser. I make sure to do it at this time in the stream, so that way all of y'all can see me throwing it in. Hopefully my phone doesn't mess up and not let me include my name. So let me see. Show me. Yes, it did. Okay, so 100, and I think y'all should be seeing this about 20 seconds before I'm saying this on stream, because there's a big delay in between the live chat and us, just because of how a stream works. So y'all should see my donation pop in, and there it is right there. The Enforcer donated $100 to World Central Kitchen. And so with that, now that we've gotten that out of the way, it's time for us to move on into the news. And this has been quite the day. Now, the thumbnail and the title says that the Wagner group, or the Wagner group, was completely obliterated in the area of Bakhmut. And that's true. Sadly, I didn't really get to put down a lot of video evidence of it. The reason being, all of the videos that we saw today of the Wagner group was them taking a nap in the fields, in the dozens, in multiple places. Mostly in the north, in between Bakhmut and Soledar. It looks like the Wagner group was sent into pretty much a suicidal assault in some open fields, and some of them made it out of the fields. Very few of them, and then they got honed in on while they were inside of a drainage ditch, and a couple of other dozens of them were wiped out. So I can't really show y'all any video or picture evidence of it. It is out there, and if y'all want to see it, I'm sure someone is posting it probably at this very moment in the NSFW tab on our Discord channel, and if you would like to join that, link is in the description below. But we're going to be starting off the Bakhmut news, which has probably been the most impressive today, by looking at the front lines first and foremost, using Deep State UA, which provides a much more accurate look of the front lines, because while we use picture and video evidence alone, they also use reports from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and also reports sometimes from the Russians. Anyways, here's the 3rd of December. Take a look at that front line, Matthew. Memorize it. Etch it out.
Yes.
All right, and here's the 4th. No change whatsoever.
Oh,
And
what
the
do you know?
And the Russians have lost another 500 soldiers killed today, probably another 1,200 wounded, over this entire area for the most part. It's one of the only active areas in the entirety of the Ukraine war at this point, and they still have not made any ground. Once again, the finger that they've pushed up onto the chicken finger, they still control that, and they still do control the 3 towns that they took yesterday, but we haven't seen any further movement. And of course, from what we could tell today, the Wagner group, which was somewhere in between Bakhmutske and Bakhmut, or I guess you could say Soledar and Bakhmut, trying to push forward, it appears, in the fields leading up to Krasnohora, and they got obliterated as well. We're assuming that that's where most of the casualties came from today, and the casualty report was just from the Wagner unit alone. I wish I could show y'all those videos and pictures. Of course, YouTube wouldn't really allow that because they were incredibly graphic, but when I say dozens in each video, which was in a different area of the front line, it was truly dozens of them. that had been killed, and we don't know how many that had been wounded that had either been picked up by the Ukrainians or had retreated from the field or had gone into a rout. But from what we could tell, at least 2 to 3 companies of the Wagner group went into a complete rout today and were almost destroyed on the battlefield. And so this is massive news in the Bakhmut area. And looking at the situation of the Russians, considering that they are the ones conducting the offensive here, and they will be the ones conducting any kind of movement or heading in any direction, let's discuss what they will probably be trying to do, considering that casualties are mounting and things aren't going incredibly well for them. First, we already know that they are preparing massive defensive lines in between Bakhmut and Popasna that they're going to fall back on once this battle fails. And so we already know that the Russian command is waiting for the battle to eventually fizzle out and for these units to be pushed back by Ukrainian counterattack. In the meantime, they will still try and conduct some kind of offensive objectives, and I believe from what we saw today with the Wagner group and knowing that the Russians always do everything about 8 times over, considering that the Wagner group was trying to push somewhere in between Bakhmutske and the highway towards Krasnohora, I believe they will do it again. And if we look at Google Maps, y'all can still see I'm on China from the video that came out today. Make sure to watch it if you're interested in that. Anyways, let me get down here to Bakhmut, and let me go up a little bit north to Bakhmutske. And you can see right here that the fields are incredibly open. There's only a small strip of forest in between Krasnohora and the T-1302 highway going from Bakhmutske to Bakhmut itself. And it appears that the Russians control, according to Deep State UA, almost everything in the tree lines adjacent to the highway. So they're about right here. If I could draw a line with my mouse cursor, that's where they are. They're probably going to once again use this small little ravine here in between these fields to move their soldiers forward, at least their infantry, under some cover, while their armor units move across the fields in front of them. They'll cross the T-1302, and they're once again probably going to try and use the series of tree lines in between the fields leading up to Bakhmutske to try, well, Krasnohora, to try and make any ground. Of course, seeing what happened to the Wagner group today, we can get the idea that it will be completely unsuccessful. Ukrainian artillery is probably already zeroed into the, I guess you could say, the cross points in these tree lines and will obliterate them once the Russians get to that point. Not only that, but Krasnohora is a couple of dozen feet higher than the fields that we're looking at. And so the Ukrainian infantry that are there can look down into the fields and fire at the Russians from miles away before they even get close. And so all in all, the Wagner group will be facing a terrible situation here again if they are used, or they may be rotated out and replaced with another unit that is, I guess, not as destroyed, so that way they can at least have a sizable force that is once again trying to push towards Krasnohora. Meanwhile, at Bakhmut itself, it appears that the chicken tender right here, and you can actually see a little bit of the ridge of the chicken tender. This forested area here is at the very summit. The rest of this is going down by, I believe, about 200 feet towards the town. The Ukrainians still control the chicken tender. The Russians are on this side currently in what appears to be rows of either abandoned houses or heavily forested areas of houses. And they're still trying to push up. They own this small finger that appears to be attached to this barn, and they're going to have to push out of that barn. And also considering that that is a solid structure, I would assume that the Ukrainians have been mercilessly bombarding that with mortar fire, and it's practically been leveled at this point. But we can't really say that for certain because we have no video or picture evidence to confirm the condition of that barn. However, we do know that that will be the point that the Russians are pushing out from, and considering that there is an opening here of about 300 yards distance in between that barn and the forested area, the Ukrainians having literally a killing field where if the Russians try and push further along the chicken tender, they're going to have to push through the wide open down the middle of it. And if we look at the Deep State UA map, that's exactly where they're getting caught up at, is right here. Right there. That's why they're not moving forward, is because they've reached a wide opening and the Ukrainians are just wiping them out whenever they go out into the open outside of a tree line. So it looks like they won't be making any ground on the chicken tender. We already know that the hill here in the southeast, nothing's happening there, and nothing will most likely happen there going forward. And down in the further south, near Kurtumivka and Andriivka, if I can find that for y'all, which is right here. It's a tiny village that doesn't even get a name on Google Maps, but these two villages are directly connected to a railroad track that is elevated above most of the ground. And so it gives them cover from infantry fire coming directly at them, but it does not give them cover from artillery or any kind of drone attacks. And so it looks like they've been pinned down either inside of these villages where there's some cover from the houses, or they've been pinned down on the other side of the railroad tracks and they can't move across because the Ukrainians on the ridgeline about a half-mile away in Klishivka are firing down on them, and it's making it impossible to move along these open fields because there is no break of sight. In fact, all of the tree lines in this area are moving north to south instead of east to west, and so if they want to advance, they're literally advancing down a lane of fire, and it'll be high casualty endeavor, or it'll be completely suicidal and nothing will ever be made of it. And so once again, the actual strategic and tactical situation of Bakhmut is looking incredibly poor. And considering that the Wagner group found that out today in the Krasnohora area by going into the, I guess you could say, the sleeping speed run, I don't think we'll be seeing them conducting any more offensives of that size again, just learning from the Krasnohora area. But one thing we know, Matthew, one thing we know all too well is that the Russians never learn, so they may actually start pushing in all of these areas again like they have been, but we already know that the casualties they'll take will ensure that they will never gain any incredibly large amounts of ground. They'll probably be very small, like a building apiece or maybe a small strip of tree line. So with that, it's now time for us to move from Deep State UA's frontline map, and it's time for us to move into our video evidence that we've gotten today. And in between Soledar and Bakhmut, we did see that the Ukrainians, while not only obliterating the Wagner group, were also cooking up some pretty good food. It looks like they're cooking up small hamburgers. This is probably some kind of a Ukrainian indigenous food, but I don't know the name of it. But the little tiny hamburger patties, that crap could go on a slider. And not only that, but this also shows another interesting facet about the Ukrainian soldiers at this part of the front line. For one, it appears that the weather conditions have improved in the area. And two, it also seems that the Ukrainian supply lines are not only able to supply high-quality food, but they're now able to supply just straight-up ground beef, which is something that most militaries never get to in terms of a logistical level, which shows that the logistic lines of the Ukrainians near that part of the front line are superb, and there's absolutely nothing that's impeding any kind of Ukrainian activity. Anything is within their reach because they have the ammunition and the equipment to do it. So if they need artillery strikes in a certain area, we can assume, based off of them being able to supply perishable foods fast enough that they are still edible, they are also delivering enough artillery shells for the Ukrainians to conduct enough counterfire to keep the Russians at bay and inflict massive casualties on them. And we're also able to assume that the Ukrainians are excelling in every other regard because their units are incredibly well supplied. And so everything in that regard is looking fantastic. Moving on into the next part of the Bakhmut front line, we did see a drone showing us the suburbs of Bakhmut and what it's looking like right now, and it's looking horrendous. But once again, like I say before, this is a little bit of a double-edged sword in terms of its, I guess you could say, the emotions that are felt by me. Of course, it's unfortunate to think that many civilians may have ended up getting wounded or killed in this area, and many people may have lost their homes, but once again, if the Ukrainian army had not stood their ground and defended this town, this would have never happened. The Russians would have rolled through and the town would largely be intact. And so it is a good sign showing that the Ukrainians have been defending this area so well that there isn't even grass anymore in the fields surrounding the street. It's literally turned into a churned up mess of dirt from artillery bombardments, and that the town has held for so long. And I mean, every single building in that town has been completely leveled, at least in this part of the suburbs. Some parts of Bakhmut have been saved so far from utter destruction, and they've been moderately damaged, but some areas closest to the front lines are completely unbearable and unlivable, like these right here. With that, that's the end of the video, but that gives you an idea of both the severity and the savagery of the Russians and their artillery bombardments in the area, and it also shows you at the same time the tenacity, the bravery, and the courage of Ukrainian soldiers to endure this level of bombardment and live in this kind of hell, yet continue to hold the front lines against these massive hordes of Russian soldiers who continue to attack the city of Bakhmut. With that, we're now going to be moving a little bit further inside Bakhmut itself, where we can see a Ukrainian soldier and his unit walking through the town and showing us what it looks like deeper inside Bakhmut, more towards the city center, as the battle continues to rage on in the distance. And so, here's the video. We hear massive firefights going on. We can see that the bombardments and the battle has been so intense that the air is filled with a mix of cold mist and fog and some acrid artillery smoke and fires, most likely. And it's unbelievable to think what these soldiers are still going through right now. And the Russians, even during the winter, even knowing that the supply lines and the roads are almost unusable at this point, they're still continuing these suicidal pushes into Bakhmut city, and we've seen the front line. We just discussed it. There's no way that the Russians can move forward from their positions right now without taking massive casualties and getting no gain. Yet the Russians continue to throw these guys at this village, thinking that eventually they can break the Ukrainian defenders inside the city and around it. And they're not. We've not seen that yet. It's been almost a whole 2.5 weeks since the second battle of Bakhmut has started, and they've only gained, the Russians, a quarter mile of ground. For about, at this point, 4,000 dead, and who knows how many wounded, somewhere around 8,000 to 12,000 wounded. And so once again, it's sizing up to be a completely pointless battle. With that, we're now going to be moving a little bit further south from Bakhmut and towards the area of Opitne, where we saw that the 93rd, the fighting 93rd, the legendary unit that defended the area around Vasilivka, and also Balaklia as well, moving on their way to new positions in the area of Bakhmut. And so with that, here's the video. These guys are some of the hardest fighting soldiers in the Ukrainian military. And the area of Balaklia, they carried the entire front line. Their single brigade held back around 3 to 4 Russian brigades in that area for around 4 months straight. Probably one of the most distinguished fighting units on the front lines right now. And they are now moving around in the area of Bakhmut to new positions. And if the 93rd's in the area, you know that the front line will hold. Well, that's the end of the video, and I've got to say, it's wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are truly utilizing the 93rd Infantry Brigade, because while the 93rd Infantry Brigade is a brigade like any other, much like the units in the United States military that began to distinguish themselves in the Second World War, like the 101st and 82nd Airborne, they are starting to make a name for themselves as not just any infantry unit, but a crack group of hardened fighters that have been holding on the onslaught of the Russian attacks in the north for who knows how long and who knows how much. We only got a glimpse of it on video footage, and yet these guys were holding up against Russian attacks that they shouldn't have been able to. And seeing that a lot of these guys apparently made it out of those battles in the Balaklia area A-OK, and some of them did end up getting wounded and killed. It was not a cakewalk. We can now see these veterans are now in the Bakhmut area, and if they're defending a line like they were in the Balaklia area, we can guarantee that the Ukrainians will receive minimum casualties and be inflicting a massive amount on the Russians, especially due to the experience they gained in the flat fields near Balaklia. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of frontline news, a little bit further south and heading towards the fringe of the Bakhmut front near Kurtimivka and Otradivka, where we saw that an Orlan drone was brought down. And so, without further ado, here's the video while we check out one of these crappy Orlans. Also, I got it muted. That is copyrighted music, and we know it. And we can see that it's come apart. It's had a rapid disassembly operation. It looks like the tail separated it from itself on impact. And you can see the crappy little two-stroke motor that pushes this thing around. And the famous soda cap that they use to cap the fuel tank on this thing. Did you know that, Matthew?
I did not.
They actually use, like, soda caps to close off the top of these fuel canisters inside of an Orlan.
Man, so they're gonna have some Sprite in their fuel tank.
Anyone want a Sprite cranberry?
Hell no.
Oh, hell no. We can see them looking at the Orlan again. And while it's a cheap drone, it is effective in its job of surveying and conducting reconnaissance for the Russians, and it looks like this one will never do it again, and the Ukrainians have gotten themselves a couple of extra little bits of cheap technological, I guess you could say, parts that they can use to either help repair some of their equipment, or maybe even field this Orlan on their side. Hopefully, they'll find something to do with the parts that are inside that Orlan. With that, we're now going to be moving down into the farthest south area of the front line. In fact, this is almost expanding over into the Donetsk front line right outside of Donetsk city. But down here we can see that the Ukrainian Foreign Legion actually came into contact with the Russian forces inside of a forest. The Ukrainian forces are moving forward through the tree lines. Well, you can see from the helmet cam, the soldier is using every single tree he can to make sure he has some cover just in case if things go south. He's also scanning the area around him. You can tell that these guys are highly trained. And the firefight just begun. It seems as though the Ukrainians are trying to figure out where the fire is coming from, and it seems as though it's coming from their left side. We see Ukrainians to the right side of the camera repositioning on other trees, and this soldier is laying down suppressing fire into the tree line, trying to keep the Russians' heads down low. We now hear a small break in the firefight, but it's now picking up once again. We can hear the cameraman yelling for the unit to fall back.
Hey, they're over there! Hey, over there!
And you see him calling out to an exact spot in the tree line, right where my mouse cursor is circling. There are Russian forces. The fire is continuing at a heavy rate. It seems as though his squad is starting to fall back. They may have overextended and pushed into the middle of a Russian unit, and they may find themselves sandwiched in between crossfire or I guess you could say, a kill zone. We now see one of them firing off an RPG towards the Russians in front of them, about 150 yards away. We now see the unit falling back. One part of the squad is covering fire while the rest of them pull back.
Good. I'm over there! 11 o'clock!
And all these guys are British. We now see him moving back. Also, real quick, these guys just aren't any Foreign Legion guys. Take a look at this guy's kit right here when he stands
Man, that
up.
was a scar.
I mean, this guy is kitted to the nuts. This guy is also kitted to the nuts. It looks like he has a bulletproof
Nines.
vest on. What?
Kitted to the nines.
No, kitted to the nuts is what I say. Kitted to the nines is for kids. But take a look at this. He's got a thick winter jacket, quality. He's also got what appears to be an AT-4, quality. He's also got a scar. We can't tell if it's heavy or light, but still, it's a scar. Those are some of the best rifles around these days. We can also see the thing is kitted to the brim with a pretty decent looking scope. I can't really tell what that modification is, whether it be a flashlight or a laser. Can't really tell for certain.
I think it's IR.
I think it is. And we can see him now running off, and his kit is top-notch. This man is pretty much a whole squad in his own right as a single soldier, and all of these British Foreign Legion members appear to be outfitted in the exact same way. And so this isn't a light infantry force by any means. You can consider this a heavy weapons company for all it matters. And so the British are really bringing the fire to the fight, literally.
That's true, but have they walked into an ambush, though? It looks like they're wide open.
I think they may have, but it looks like they've dealt with the situation quite well and they're pulling back to a safer position. I mean, they've really moved it too. They've been laying down suppressive fire to keep the Russians' heads low, and they've also been moving back at an incredibly fast pace. It also looks like they've taken no casualties so far. You now see him firing his gun again. And we can see that the squad was continuing to withdraw from the firefight right there at the end of the video. And with that, that concludes that small snippet of a firefight that happened somewhere in the Kurdyivka area. And man, dude, the British set a standard of excellence out there on the front lines. They got into an engagement with the Russians. They immediately started to lay down some rounds down range. It sounded like the fire was starting to die off nearer to the end of the battle, or it was getting a little bit quieter, maybe suggesting that they had knocked out a couple of these Russian soldiers. And not only that, they assessed the situation immediately, saw that they were in a precarious position, and began to withdraw from the firefight as fast as they entered it. These guys are top level. Hell, they may even make American soldiers in the U.S. Army look like they're just run-of-the-mill soldiers with the kind of precision, the training, the attention to detail they had just going into it, being into it, and withdrawing from it. And I've got to say, these guys are definitely the reason why the Foreign Legion is considered, much like the Fighting 93rd, one of the best units in Ukraine so far. And got to give a lot of credit to these guys. They don't even have to be there, yet they are, and they're continuing to give it to the Russians. And they also, looks like they may have all brought some of their own kit too, because the Ukrainians don't issue all of that stuff, at least at the beginning of the war, to the Foreign Legion. They were somewhat more of a light infantry force back then, and now they've developed into each squad member being pretty much the squad itself with a rifle, an AT weapon. I'm supposing that some of them may even have man pads. I mean, they're impressive, I gotta say. What do you think, Matthew?
I'd say they're impressive. My only thing is, it seems like they walked right into an ambush. They're really well kitted, but I mean, goodness, that was a close one.
That was a close one, but they pulled it off quite well, considering that they almost stepped in it and then they got themselves right out of it. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of news, the last bit of news we've got from the Bakhmut front line, and this is literally on the fringe of becoming the Donetsk front, but we saw a misfortune, a Russian misfortune. It appears that they were trying to move more forces up from the rear towards the front line in the Kernivivka area, and it seems as though they had a small incident where one of their BMPs, laden with infantry both inside and out, ran over an anti-tank mine. Here's the video. It sounds like they may have straight-piped this BMP as the one in front of them continues to move forward behind the T-72, and it looks like it just went to Kingdom Come. We can see the survivors getting off the BMP and running in every direction, even though these Russians are surrounded by what we're assuming to be almost a half company of Russian soldiers. These guys have now decided it's time for them to clock out, and they're running in every direction, not even back towards their company. The tank has also come to a complete stop as well. We're not seeing any movement from the tank any longer, and it begs the question if we didn't see the tank crew actually bail out of the tank at the same time. But we can't really confirm that. We can now see this BMP-2 backing up. And that's the end of the video, but man, that BMP got it. And also, what's really nice to know is that apparently the Ukrainians were able to lay down some mines right onto the road that the Russians never saw. And of course, that's not surprising. The Russians run over mines that are in broad daylight, but still, they got a whole BMP probably loaded with a platoon or even 2 platoons of Russian soldiers. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this area of the front line, and it's once again looking like the Ukrainians are doing nothing more than a turkey shoot, wiping out hundreds of Russians a day, thousands of them if you're including the wounded as well, and the Russians are once again making no ground whatsoever. The battle has already been won by the Ukrainians. It's just a matter of waiting out these last Russian assaults here over the next few weeks until they finally give up and begin to fall back to their defensive lines in between Bakhmut and Popasna. Meanwhile, while the situation is going incredibly poorly, Putin has decided to try and rally his people and make sure that he lets them know that he's on their side and he understands their plight. And he wants to talk to the wounded Russian soldiers as well on TV, so that way the whole nation knows how he cares for his people. And he made a great demonstration today of how much he really cares for them in this little clip. And I was really surprised. He showed a lot more care than I thought he would. I mean, I don't know about you, man, but check out this video and look how much attention he gives this Russian soldier who got wounded in Donetsk and almost his entire unit got wiped out. And he's telling Putin, I thank you so much for letting us save Donetsk. And just look how much Putin cares. Watch.
Еще очень сильно вас поблагодарить о том, что Донбасс забрали в Россию. Не зря мы боролись, не зря пацаны гибли. Спасибо вам.
Владимир Александрович, прежде всего...
Look at that. Isn't that nice? I love to know that if I
That's
ever...
cold.
Yeah, I would love to know if I was ever a Russian soldier and I had my legs blown off on a front line somewhere and I went home and I actually got to talk to the president of my nation, that while I was tearing up and crying to him and thanking him for the chance to go and lose my legs, he wouldn't even look me in the eye and he would be looking down at paperwork and writing on it while he was talking to me. I would absolutely love that.
Хочу
You know, you'd think if Putin wasn't just a straight up bastard, that he maybe had a heart and couldn't look him in the eyes.
No, but you can tell by that right there at the end, with him looking up for just a second, it's not anything about feeling bad for the guy that he's lost his legs. He just doesn't really care. Hell, you can even see him writing on the paperwork right there. See right there, he had just been writing before the camera flicked back to him. And he looks up from writing on some paperwork, probably for something else, and you can see that the look in his face right here. Wait, right here. Right there, that's not a look of compassion or sadness for this guy. It's a look like, come on, you're wasting my time, hurry the hell up.
Pretty much. That's pretty damn cold.
And that's how much this guy really cares. He cares so little, he can hardly even keep on a mask to the public in Russia that he actually cares. And even to a wounded soldier who's now bound to a wheelchair for dying for a president that doesn't even care for him. That's the situation in Russia, summed up in a nutshell. The government doesn't even care at all for the people. Even when they're faced with the suffering that the government has put their own citizens through, they will sit here and act like they're wasting their time. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this little clip from Putin. And of course, I want you to know at the beginning there, I was being sarcastic. I don't imagine at all that, you know, and just looking at this clip, you can already see this guy is one of the coldest, most aloof people in the world. You could put a burned corpse in front of Putin and he would sit there and say, why the hell have you stunk up this room? He wouldn't even think about it being a Russian soldier for a moment. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of news from Moscow, because the propaganda channels, of course, are still working full steam, because with a war going this badly, you've got to have propaganda working overtime to try and make people believe that something is happening that's positive somewhere out there in the war. And so we can see that they've actually brought on one of the TikTok army guys. And while he's on, they're showing a clip of the Chechens in Ukraine, the Kadyrovites in Ukraine. But lo and behold, it's not the Kadyrovite Chechens, it's actually the Chechen Mansour battalion that's fighting for the Ukrainians that they showed on TV while a Kadyrovite was on. So let me show you all this clip, because this is one of those goofs that will go down for the ages.
Сегодня появлялись. Кстати, тоже чеченские бойцы на фоне вывески с надписью «Бахмут». Что сейчас происходит на...
These guys are not Russian. They're part of the Chechen Mansour battalion fighting for Ukraine, and they're showing them on TV while the Kadyrovite Chechen working for Ramzan Kadyrov is on TV at the same time.
Что сейчас происходит на этом направлении?
Ольга, добрый вечер. Наверное, надо отметить в первую очередь, что в направлении Бахмута у нас, получается, работают бойцы ЧВК «Вагнер» и первого армейского корпуса.
We see them trying to continue the interview like normal.
Непосредственно тех, которые находятся в моем подчинении, на том участке нету. Это получается соседний у нас участок слева. Надо отметить, что Бахмут, в принципе, планомерно зачищается, берется под контроль наших подразделений в общей сложности, значит, союзнических, как мы их до сих пор называли. Ну и, естественно, надо отметить, что эта работа очень результативно уже сегодня дает, как говорится, четкие очертания того, что...
You see them showing this video on loop over and over again, just rubbing salt in the wound in this guy's face. Also, I like the tactical fanny pack. Now that's class. We see them looking around the damage and desolation of Bakhmut. They're not Russians. They're Chechen Ukrainians.
Вот связь должна быть хорошая. Это работает? Ну, не показывает. Да не, навряд ли. Не показывает.
You can actually see the badge of the Chechen Mansour battalion right there in that guy's jacket, just in case if y'all are wondering, because there's no identifying armbands on these guys. That's the badge of the Chechen Mansour battalion on that guy's arm. So it is actually Ukrainian soldiers that they were showing on Russian TV, saying that these were Russians of the same unit that that guy was from. With that, that's the end of the video, and it's funny to see that the Russian propaganda makes such bad goofs that they actually show Ukrainian soldiers while Russian soldiers on TV, and they say, "Look at the brave soldiers from your unit fighting for our nation," and they're Ukrainians. Anyways, with that, it's time for us to move on from the silliness of and sadness of all the propaganda going on in Moscow today, and it's time for us to start moving a little bit further south into the area of Tula in Russia, where we saw that the Russians are once again going back into the prisons because they need more men, and a partial mobilization can cause a decent amount of unrest. So the quickest and easiest way to get new men to the front lines is to go into the prison and just scoop your hand into the pile of convicts that are in there and then throw them at the front lines and hope that they do something. And we can see that more convicts have been given some military equipment and are being prepared to be sent into Ukraine. We can even see that they've given them some kind of makeshift jackets and put Z's on the side of them to get the point across. We also got a translation on this video too, and so here's the video.
Для истории Шаргопа будем снимать. Все ребята собрались на войну. Укропом жопы рвать. Все они здесь практически.
We now see him showing us around the convicts barracks. What's crazy to me is that these convicts got barracks. We've never seen that before, even for the normal partially mobilized reservists that were called up several months ago. They were sleeping in fields and stuff in the freezing cold without even tents, but somehow these guys got barracks, which I'm not understanding, or they're still in the prison, one or the other.
They didn't say who.
Yeah, they'll kill each other and steal their teeth. Catch Zelensky. I'm sure a lot of guys in the Russian army have tried to do that and failed.
I wonder what these guys did.
I wonder. I mean, like, hell, it's hard to get in prison in Russia. I mean, like, they must have murdered someone to be here.
Yeah, they look like nutcases.
These are the ones in those videos where Russian soldiers are refusing to go to the front, where they go, "These guys are mentally disabled." These are these guys. Show your face for history. I don't think anyone wants to see that ugly mug for history. Look, this guy's actually calling people. He's like, Baldy is a maniac. He's like mentally unstable. That's what you want on the front line, so that way when the pressure gets there, they just crack on the spot.
Isn't that like the pot calling the kettle black, though?
I would say so. Wait, did that guy just walk by with like a glass of brandy? Oh no, he didn't. No, that's like some kind of like a. Yeah, that's it. Wait a minute, is that Brass? Is he drinking a Moscow Mule? What the hell? I'm a complete loss of what that is. If y'all know in the chat, let us know, because this man is actually getting some of the, like, some Hennessy or something, or a Jameson break. I don't know, but it's not the normal run-of-the-mill stuff.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, he's psychotic.
Don't turn your back on him.
Yeah, always pay attention to the quiet kid in school and the quiet kid in the barracks, because he's going to do something. Anyways, that's the end of the video, and while we're getting a good laugh out of the poor state of these guys right here, one thing that always adds a little bit of an extra layer to this in all seriousness is that these guys are going to be dealing with Ukrainians behind the lines in occupied villages and towns, and these people are dangerous. They've been put in prison, and it's incredibly hard to be put in prison for Russia. You have to do some incredibly serious crimes to be put in prison there. And these guys are now going to be pulled out of the prisons and sent to Ukraine to deal with Ukrainian citizenry that are living in occupied territory. And one can only imagine the kinds of atrocities and crimes that they may get up to back there, and hopefully the Ukrainians can single out these guys specifically and obliterate them before they can commit any crimes against the Ukrainian people. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news inside of Russia. And real quick, if y'all wouldn't mind joining me for a very interesting statement from the Prime Minister of Finland, who was actually talking about the situation as far as Ukrainian support and how it's working out in her opinion. I actually thought it was very interesting because she made some comments to say that the Europeans as a whole need to work on strengthening their armed forces collectively, because without the United States stepping in, she believes that Europe wouldn't have been strong enough individually to do anything if it wasn't for the United States stepping in for one reason or another, which I thought was incredibly interesting, and I would agree with, of course, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So with that, here's the address from the Prime Minister of Finland, a very short one, but a very interesting one nonetheless. And so let me unmute this real quick.
I think China could play an important role to stop the war if they want it, and it's up to China how they want to act concerning the war. But we shouldn't only rely on that about China or any others. We should make sure that we are stronger. And now, I must be very honest, brutally honest with you, Europe isn't strong enough right now. We would be in trouble without the United States involving the war in Ukraine. The United States has given a lot of weapons, a lot of financial aid, a lot of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and Europe isn't strong enough yet. And we have to make sure that we are also building those capabilities when it comes to European defense industry, and making sure that we could cope in different kind of situations.
Well, that's the end of the video and the end of the address from the Prime Minister of Finland, and I can see that everyone in the live chat is simping for her, including Matthew. It was like, you got to respect the Prime Minister of Finland.
Hey, a little bit.
but beyond her looking incredibly good, she does have some incredibly good points about Europe as well. Considering that at the beginning of this war, the Europeans relied a pretty decent deal on Russian gas. This has become a detriment on the Europeans going into the winter, because the price of heating and basic necessities that revolve around, I guess you could say, natural gas infrastructure has skyrocketed so far. And if they had been able to strengthen their economic sector and ensure that it wasn't connected to any rival states like the Russians, maybe connect them, I guess you could say, inter-European Union wise in between other European Union nations, or connect them with the United States or other allied nations, they would have been able to avoid the economic side of things. And also, steps have been taken in the direction to make Europe stronger. This isn't anything that hasn't gone without response in terms of the situation. The Germans have massively upped their annual defense budget, along with several other countries in the European Union, and I believe that is certainly a step in the right direction. Seeing that the Russians may try and lash out here within the next several years, although we know that after the war in Ukraine, they probably won't be able to do anything for the next 2 decades, it will be crucially important for the Europeans as a whole to have both the economic and military manpower that, in case of the United States was not to step into the situation, they would be able to go it alone. And I think that is more than important, because if the United States doesn't step in, then they could actually end up on the short end of the stick and not have their own interests secured. And at the end of the day, every nation must always look out for its own self-interests, and the Europeans as a whole need to make sure that they can look out for theirs as well. And so with that, I hope we addressed that little part of the news incredibly well. I hope all of y'all continue to simp for the Prime Minister of Finland, because it's still going on. I mean, like, there's a million of y'all down there who are like, she's pretty, she's hot. But anyways, we're now going to be moving on into Kyiv real quick, because we actually have something very interesting to watch. It looks like when y'all send in super chats to this channel to help us to keep running, and y'all say, here's to the pizza fund, well, y'all been helping to coalesce a enigmatic being, the pizza fund creature, that has now arrived in Ukraine and is now delivering pizza to the Ukrainians a la American style. But before we show this video and show what's been going on in Kyiv, and a really cool video at that, which kind of ties into World Central Kitchen in a way, we have to cover the fundraiser, because it's only been 50 minutes and we're only $800 away from the fundraising goal. As a matter of fact, before we get into this question segment, it is now time for General Order number 7. If you have $5 to throw into tonight's fundraiser, throw it in right now. I'll actually make sure to throw in $5 of my own to leave from the front. I know that someone's going to beat me to it, though. That kind of makes me a little jealous, but it's totally fine, because General Order 7 is in effect right now. We need to get to the $5,000 goal in the next 3 minutes. So, let me throw in mine. And there is Mark. He did a little bit more than $5, which is pretty insane. And thank you so much, Mark. And y'all should see mine here in a second. Right there. And so general order number 7 is in effect. If you have $5 to send into tonight's fundraiser, send it in and let's get to 5,000. But with that, let's move on into the polls because I believe you have run a couple, Matthew, and they look like they're pretty interesting. So what do we got?
All right, so real quick, let me grab a couple of more of these questions and donations out of the chat. There we go. Grab that one. It's starting to move very fast, so I don't want to miss anybody's donation real quick. Let me look through here. There we go. Okay, I think I've got it. So we're going into the polls, right?
Yes, we are going into the polls.
All right, so the first poll said, should the act of using mercenaries in war be a war crime? For example, the Wagner group. It looks like 45% said no, there is nothing wrong with it. 24% said not sure, and 31% said yes, it should be a war crime. Now for me, I don't like the Wagner group, but I don't think it should be a war crime for mercenaries to be used because the United States has used them in the past, and also some countries rely on mercenaries because they don't have a very large military force. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that mercenaries have been and are always a part of war, and I don't believe that they should be ruled out. However, I do believe that it is the responsibility of a government, if they are to employ mercenaries, to ensure that they follow the rules of war or the rules of engagement for their own nation, and if they don't, to have them booted. And we reached $5,000! We've done it, and they're still rolling in. General Order number 7 is killing it right now. We've been able to raise over $1,000 in 2 minutes. Unbelievable. And I'm going to thank all of y'all in the Lee Spring Army for helping us to reach this goal tonight and also blowing through it with General Order number 7. And so with that, I've got to say I'm honestly hyped up right now. I don't know if I can get back into the poll, but to answer that really quickly again, I do believe that they are just a part of war. Historically, they always have been. You can look at Swiss mercenaries in the Middle Ages. You can look at them still guarding the Vatican today. They've just always been around, and the U.S. used a lot of private military companies in Iraq to, I guess you could say, conduct peacekeeping and security behind the lines. And so with that, I hope we covered that poll fairly well, and let's get on into the next one.
All right, so getting on into the next one here, while I just clicked off of it. All right, so the question was, which do you think is the weaker link in Russia's military? It looks like 18% said enlisted leadership, 68% said officer leadership, and 14% said I am not sure. So on this one, I'm going to say I'm not sure. I know the officers are very, very incompetent, but at the same time, if you have a bad NCO base, that can also be just as devastating. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that the worst thing to have falling apart is the non-commissioned officer corps. If you have a poor NCO corps, and, well, actually, it's really hard to say this because they kind of work hand in hand. If you have a poor officer corps, it doesn't matter how good your NCOs are, the front line will collapse because the strategy and the planning wouldn't be there at the higher ends to make sure that the front line is stable enough for the NCOs to excel. So the officers are incredibly important, but at the same time, NCOs are also incredibly important as well because the NCO is actually down there in the knit and the grit of the battlefield itself, helping out a platoon or a squad, and he has to make sure that these guys are able to, I guess you could say, do their jobs and do their drills as best as they can when involved in a firefight. And so the NCOs are important in the everyday conducting of the battlefield, and the officer corps is more so important in the abstract conducting of the war as a whole. NCOs are for battles, officers are for wars. But in the end, I would say it's a lot more, it could definitely weaken your military if your officer corps is worse off, because then you're just screwed all the way around. It doesn't matter how good the NCOs are, it will go poorly. Officers can actually do a lot to improve the situation, even if there is a weaker NCO corps, because they can set up the NCOs and, well, the units into somewhat defensible positions on incredibly good ground to ensure that it doesn't really matter the training or the quality of these soldiers, they can at least hold the ground that they have. The Russians have neither. They have a non-existent NCO corps, and they also have an incredibly incompetent officers corps, and so all around they just get screwed over. But with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well. And do we have another?
So that is it. And also, real quick, I saw our Discord moderator, Susie Halsey, say that we are having a flood of people going to the Discord.
Really?
So if you haven't already, please go down to the description. We have a link to our Discord server down there. Feel free to go join it. We do a bunch of cool stuff over there on the Discord server, and we'd love to have you. And also, please hit that like button as well, because it helps us get the channel out there a whole lot faster. And also, Enforcer, that was our last poll, but we do have a lot of top donors to get to if you want to go ahead and address those.
And let's hear them, because one thing I would like to say, and also if y'all could stick around, I would love to ask if y'all could give a huge thanks to all of these top donors. While it seems like we're just calling them out for the funsies, we call them out because these people are helping out in massive ways to keep people alive in Ukraine. For example, I've seen a couple of $100 donations come in tonight to this fundraiser, and $100 can feed about 200 people in Ukraine with a basic meal and keep them, I guess you could say, healthy enough to survive the winter. And so with that, let's hear out these people, and let's all give them a huge thanks, every single one of y'all in the Lee Spring Army, for helping these Ukrainians to survive thanks to World Central Kitchen.
All right, so we have a whole bunch of them, so please bear with me on this. Up first, we have a $150 donation from DCC Prime 1. We also have a $140 donation from Mark, Slava Ukraine, as well as a $100 donation from BMW Bavaria, Just Chillin', Daniel Murray, Misk77, Rustin Rott, Malachite, Don Stellan, also Steve Sturko, Snoozy Green, Chip Kerwan, BC Skyman, Gene Kustra, Ken Cat, Ash Van ES, another one from Snoozy Green. We also have a $69 not a super chat, a donation from Psyops.
Very nice.
Then we have Psyops. Then we have several $50 donations. The first one is from Robert Harrington. Then we have one from Magic Sky Girl, Truman, Bobby Ibarra, Pavan Allman, Twizzy, Benjamin Rude, Caroline Karetnikov, Avari Amandubratis, Axel K, Greg Carrier, Elspeth. We also have one from KFR, Guns SMFL, Justy Ryan, Bill Vanderpool, and also Rob M. So, thank you, folks, so much for that support. I see some folks wondering how I caught them all. I have no idea, but somehow I got them all. If I missed yours, please let me know, and I'll be sure to call it out, because it's been a little crazy in the chat. But seriously, though, big thanks to you all, and we're now up to 5.7 thousand on the fundraiser. So, yeah!
And I gotta say, you super donators. What should we call them? That super donators.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
Super donators, Lee Spring Army. I guess you could say soldiers. All you are all heroes, and I've got to say we got to give you all a huge thanks. While it doesn't seem like even supporting a fundraiser is much, that goes a massively long way. Without the support that we raise on these fundraisers every single week, people that are actually on the ground in Ukraine could never follow through with the jobs that they're there for. Doctors Without Borders would never be able to conduct surgery. Revived Soldiers of Ukraine would never be able to help another soldier walk again. World Central Kitchen wouldn't be able to cook up meals for hundreds of people and help them to eat through this winter while food security is becoming incredibly scarce in Ukraine. For that reason, while those people who actually are on the very end of the chain actually getting this help to the Ukrainians, you all are heroes in your own way. And that's why I'm incredibly proud to say that the Lee Spring Army is our community on YouTube. No one else has a community like this anywhere else out there on YouTube, and I got to thank each and every one of y'all for being the massive heroes that y'all are, helping out in a way that helps the people out there in Ukraine itself continue to function. And so with that, thank you to all of y'all so much once again, and long live the Lee Spring Army. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from calling out all of the incredible donors who have sent in support tonight, and also a huge thanks to everyone who helped out in General Order number 7. We can't call out the hundreds of y'all, but do understand that the hundreds of y'all make the single goal possible. And so with that, let's get on to some questions, and let's see about answering a couple from the live chat, because I've seen loads of y'all asking incredibly good questions.
All right, and also shout out to GL for putting in a $100 donation as well. Just want to go ahead and call that one off so don't forget it. And also, folks, really good questions, and if you have one for us, feel free to tag @EnforcerMatt and send it to me, and I'll add it to the spreadsheet. And also, once we answer our 3 questions, we'll be right back to the news. So the first one, of course, goes to our Morse code decoders of the stream, BME, Mark Hodges, CFA, and also WF2U. They said the Morse code says, no ground made in Bakhmut again. This pleases the Kremlin gremlin.
Y'all did get it correct. It does please the Kremlin Gremlin. So just look at how he was looking at that soldier. He loves what they're doing. And so with that, I thank y'all all so much once again for decoding the Morse code. And also, in case if y'all are new to the channel, we do the Morse code every single every single day of the week. It's a brand new Morse code message. And so if you don't know Morse and you wanted to learn it, you can always practice decoding messages, or at least reading messages like our Morse code actual readers say, by coming onto the stream every single night and listening to the Morse code that comes out in the first 10 minutes and the countdown. And so with that, thank you all so much once again for doing that, and we are on to the next one.
And also, thank you to Anonymous for putting in a $7,500 W. I'm not sure what currency that is, but it looks like it bumped us up pretty good, so thank you very much for that. Enforcer, do you know how much that is?
I don't, but let's see. W currency sign. Let's see here.
Just copy and paste it. Oh wait, there it is. It's that
the
W.
won. It's a won.
A won. Oh, what do you know? That's cool.
$2. I believe it's South Korean won. So we got viewers in South Korea. Is that crazy or what?
That is crazy.
So let's see if we can translate that. Hopefully we got that one correct. But 7,500. $6.
Well then, it bumped us up.
It did bump us up. It did get us to the next level. And so with that, let's get to the next question.
All right, and the next question goes to Dark Foil, who says, does Ukraine have any home-produced long-range missiles?
The Ukrainians do. They actually have a short-range ballistic missile called the Grom. The Grom is actually fielded currently in this war. It has been produced and deployed by Ukrainian forces somewhere around the front lines, but we've never gotten confirmation whether it's been used or not. We do see here from some pictures taken in, I believe, 2018, a HIMARS-2 launching system right here. So we do know that they exist. We do know that the Ukrainians have them and can use them, and these things have a range of about 500 miles. And so, yes, they do have a domestically home-built version of a short-range ballistic missile, but we've never gotten enough proof or evidence to show that these things have ever been used. So with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well, and with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we'll be showing that video of the pizza.
All right, and the next one goes to Duncan VR, who says, question, how about the Tupolev Tu-95 versus the B-21?
Oh, not even a contest. You're talking about this crappy looking sad sap of a plane, the Tu-95. Even the ones that are flying look like they've seen better days. Like, look at the paint job on the tail. It's literally chipping off. That's how poorly maintained this one is. And it's flying. They're using it. And then compare that to a B-21. Well, the only one that we've seen. The B-21 Raider right here. Let me see. Not a computer rendering. Wait a minute. Hang on. Is that... Oh, that's just a CGI rendering again. Man, they got 1 million of these CGI renderings. They did that too much. Anyways, compared to this thing... No contest. Hell, I mean, like, this isn't even worth considering, Duncan VR. That's nothing more than just a joke right there. And so, I thank you so much for the question, but by far, the B-21 beats out the Tu-95 for no other reason than its stealth, and so for it being stealth and not being able to be picked up on radar, where an interceptor could be triangulated into its position and then destroy it, it is by far superior to the T-95. And so with that, I hope that answers that question in a short way, but fairly well, and to just get straight to the point. And with that, we're now going to be moving on from all of that news. We're now going to be moving back to the streets of Kyiv, where we can see that the Pizza Fund has coalesced itself into reality. There is an American-style pizza truck that has made it to Ukraine and is helping to feed the Ukrainian public New York-style pizza. And what's crazy is that we actually talked about this on last night's stream, like the different styles of pizza, and we saw New York-style here. Also, let me mute that because I'm sure that we'll get a copyright for it for some reason. And we can see them bringing out a brand new pizza and cutting it up and feeding people the pizza. Oh, hell, they're double dipping,
is that
Matthew.
calzone?
They're folding it into a calzone?
George, I gotta have one of these calzones.
George, I gotta have another one of these calzones. The eggplant calzones, George. It doesn't look that bad either. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and I gotta say, that is some good-looking pizza. And it's also good to know that apparently Americans are bringing American food over to Ukraine and also feeding them as well. And this is in the end, what World Central Kitchen does is incredibly similar. This food van is not, as far as I know, connected directly to World Central Kitchen, but they are doing the same thing in achieving the same goal, which is feeding the Ukrainian public. And so if you want to see more scenes like this, make sure to support World Central Kitchen, and we will try and find some videos in the future, probably on Tuesday when we come back, of World Central Kitchen helping to feed Ukrainians over the weekend. And so with that...
It kind of looks like a quesadilla.
A quesadilla?
I misspoke, by the way. That was a quesadilla I meant to say.
Quesadilla? Oh, man.
A quesadilla.
About to get flamed, man. Oh, yeah, I would like one of the quesadillas and a burrito.
I was thinking in my mind, I was going to say, it looks like a pizza quesadilla, but for some reason it came out quesadilla.
Oh, we better move on before the flaming begins. And so with that, we're moving out of Kyiv, and we're now going to be moving into the area of our location unknowns. And we've actually seen some pretty interesting ones today. Starting off with the drone wars. Some of y'all may remember from Star Wars, I think it was the green thing, Yoda, I believe, who said the drone wars has begun, and it's actually true. In Ukraine, the drone wars have now begun. The Ukrainians and the Russians are now dogfighting their drones against each other while gangster music plays in the background. You can see this drone coming down on top of the other one. Unfortunately, I don't know which drone is which. Oh no, Matthew, you're getting flamed. Everyone in the chat going, quesadilla.
Yo, oh. I'm over here dying inside.
Oh man, this thing will become something that's around for weeks or months even. I mean, you see the drones trying to run away from each other, but this one's hunting down the other one. It's a battle of the minds up here, Matthew. This guy's trying to make sure his wings don't get clipped. And he keeps on just doing some evasive maneuvers trying to get the other one off of him. But oh, it looks like the battle's closing in a little bit now. It's lengthening out again. The smaller drone down below is trying to pull off some quick moves. He's now gotten some altitude. That's very dangerous. We can now see the camera adjusting. This little drone once again trying to scoot away. It was almost a clip there. He's now coming back. He's flying under the other drone. He's now moving forward. He's moving right again. He's now moving right. Actually misspoke. He was moving left the first time. Now he's moving left again. It's moving right. Oh, the other drone almost got a kill on him. And the other one's still alive, however. It's now gotten even lower in altitude. It's once again swishing around, trying to avoid the other drone. You can see this drone once again trying to line itself up for the kill. I believe we can assume that this is the Ukrainian drone we're watching the footage from. Because usually Supernova Plus is Ukrainian footage. And... oh, he came down on top of him. The drone has been hit. It's going down. And that's the end of the video. And quite the kill. That was actually pretty wild to see that go down all the way from the very start to the very end. And what a dogfight. Whoever thought that we would see dogfights come back again in aerial warfare? No longer is it against pilots looking each other down at their aircraft. It's against drone pilots looking at each other down on their cameras and their iPhones. Pretty wild if you ask me. But with that, we're now going to be moving on from this location unknown news, which was bizarre to see, and we're now going to be moving on into the next one, where we saw that an entire Russian logistics unit was destroyed before it even left its hangar. They apparently pulled it into a large farm shed somewhere in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians obliterated the entire logistics force while it was parked inside the silo. And so here's the video. We gotta mute it because there's music playing in the background. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. Actually, I do, but, you know, they're sensible, I promise you. You can see that the Russian trucks have been completely obliterated inside of this here silo. We see the Ukrainians saying that the thing's been burned to the core. I guess you could say it's bad to the bone. We can even see that they put some floral arrangements on the side of the barn to commemorate the loss of another significant part of their Russian logistics force. With that, that's the end of the video, but quite nice to see that they were able to take out an entire logistics unit. I actually see some of y'all saying that that drone was not taken out, so let me go back real quick to the very last few seconds of that clip, and let me see if I saw that correctly, because to me it looked like it veered off the camera at the very end because the propellers had been struck. So let's try and do a frame by frame, although we can't slow it down. So it hits the blades, this one flips over, but it stabilizes itself, it's looking back down. Actually, that looks like it may have survived. Y'all are right.
It survived.
Yeah, it survived. I saw that wrong. For some reason earlier, it was like my eyes played a trick on me. It looked like it was going out of frame, but it was rapidly losing altitude. But apparently not. It did survive. So sadly, it wasn't the epic payoff that I thought it was going to be at the start, but they still did get a solid hit on that Russian drone. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next clip of Location Unknown News, now that we were able to clarify that little mix-up, where we can see the old Maxim being tested before it's sent to the front lines for Ukraine. The Russians and the Ukrainians have been using Maxim machine guns to an unbelievable degree, considering that these guns are around 130 and 140 years old. And we can see right here that they're actually testing out multiple Maxims. We can see one right here and one to the right side of the screen being fired at a testing range to make sure that they still work before they're sent to the front. And so here's the video.
Андрюха, огонь!
It's bizarre to see a 140-year-old machine gun still being used. Like, it's weird to think that both sides are using them as well. It's not just the Ukrainians, it's also the Russians to a massive degree. And so with that, that's the end of that video. It's very bizarre to see this kind of stuff, but I guess that these weapons still do have a place on the battlefield. These can easily be used in entrenched positions like a bunker or a pillbox, and set up in a stationary position because they're rather heavy and can be used to hold down a position. So they're not mobile. They're not going to be used by any frontline infantry squads pushing forward into occupied territory, but they will be used in the Bakhmut area, most likely inside of a bunker, to lay down Wagner guys like they're some kind of sunflowers growing in the fields. Although now sunflowers are out of season, we'll have to wait until next year before we can make that joke. We're now going to be moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we also saw Russian levels of intelligence, I guess you could say visualized. Let's take a look at this video.
I like the title right there.
That's it. We are lucky that they are so effing stupid. Let's check it out. Okay, so they opened up a can. What's wrong with that? Oh my god! He used a can opener that on a can that actually had a pop-open lid. Oh my god!
That honestly hurts my head so much.
Oh my
god. My OCD kicking in.
Oh my god, that is the next level of stupid. That proves that over 70% of their population have never made it out of high school, because who the hell can mess up that stupidly? Look at that. You can even see the gnaw marks of what was probably a knife or a can opener being used to pop open the sides of this thing. And there's literally just a pop-open top on the other end. Are they that dumb? Have they never seen that before? Oh my god.
I guarantee they cut their hand on it too. They had to.
Is that why they're winning? Are they winning because simple things are just beyond the average Russian soldier?
Probably.
Probably. I mean, like, I think it may be.
I thought that was a rhetorical question.
No, it was a serious question. I mean, I think that this is the large reason why the Russians are losing, because common sense stuff that would come easily to people here in the West, or really just anyone, doesn't go into their heads. Either they're so drunk that they neither comprehend or know about this because they've been so drunk their entire lives, or they just never learn basic things like pop open tops on cans. God bless it, though. I mean, like, this level of stupidity is really helping the Ukrainians to win this war, but still, it's unbelievable to see on such a simple level. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip, where we can actually see the Russian casualty report, because that kind of stupidity doesn't pay off. It ends up costing the Russians dearly. And according to this casualty report, once again, they've actually started to lose a significant number of armor, not just even along with their casualty reports day by day. They've lost another 550 troops killed, another 6 armored personnel carriers destroyed, and 5 tanks destroyed and lost as well. That is an incredibly high number from about the past week and a half, where they've been losing about 1 to 2 tanks per day. That's an increase of nearly 150%, even on the higher end. And so they are starting to lose quite a decent amount of materials, once again, trying to take the Bakhmut area. They've also lost another 7 supply trucks, and I think we just saw all of those supply trucks in the previous video, where they were all burned inside of that barn. That may have been all 7 of them that they've lost today. They've also lost another 2 artillery pieces, a drone, and an aircraft. We did not see the aircraft on film today, but I believe we'll probably see it tomorrow, or we may have seen it the other day and they're finally accounting for it. But these losses, once again, are getting quite high, especially when you look at the total figure of 91,150 Russian soldiers killed. It is getting astronomical at this point, and the Russians cannot keep taking these kinds of losses without needing to call up another partial mobilization due to a lack of manpower. And we know at this point that that ticking time bomb will explode in about 2 weeks' time, based off our calculations about a month ago. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from the casualty report. Once again, horrific to see for the Russians, and pretty good for us to see, because these numbers and them increasing in height day by day assures us that Ukrainian suffering will end much sooner, and the war will not go on as long as it could have. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown News, where we see some Ukrainian soldiers celebrating the news. Can't play the music, but I can. Now I gotta mute it. But you see them still dancing down there. And they're having a fun time. I don't know what that is. A nay-nay? A gritty? A nay-gritty? I don't know.
I guess you could say they're busting it down.
Are they goaded with the sauce?
They're dripping. Gotta go get back in the whip and head back to the crib.
Yeah, they got to get back in the whip, head up there to the front, get out the gat, spray him down. Anyways, with that, that's the end of the video, and it's still good to see proof that Ukrainian morale is incredibly high. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next clip of news. And you know, I kind of kept this a little low key so far, but I think y'all may remember this, and I've always got to give an introduction to this one because I don't know if people know this or not. But the T-90M is the best tank that the Russians actually field, and they only have about 30 of these things. You can see a picture of it right here. Look at that. The sleek, elegant lines. The beautiful structure. I almost sound like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho when you saw that business card, Matthew. Like, it's laminated. It's got the perfect text font. Like, that's this tank.
Yes.
Like, for the Russians, that's this tank. And it's decent. I mean, it's not great. It's just a T-72 that's been heavily upgraded and then renamed the T-90 and then the T-90M due to even further upgrades. But this is the best the Russians have, and compared to anything else, this thing may as well be their Terminator in terms of what a tank is capable of. And believe it or not, lo and behold, the Ukrainians captured the fourth one of the war today. And so here's the video. If you don't believe me, just watch. Anyways, here's the Ukrainian soldiers posing to take pictures in front of it.
Паук на приеме.
Also, Scott mentioning they dance like girls because they were girls.
Не знаю, что за модель.
But look at that, another T-90M. This is the fourth one.
Братуха, привет передавай. Вот так, блядь.
Oh, he almost that was bad, nearly.
He just walked right into the barrel.
Пидорасы, Юра. Командир на фоне Т-90. Все буде добре.
So with that, that's the end of the video. And I gotta say, it's very good to know that the Russians the crews they even put in the T-90Ms aren't trained enough to not destroy them before they abandon them. They will abandon them intact in running order. The Ukrainians have captured 3 of them and destroyed 1 of them in the Kharkiv area around day 140. The rest of them have been captured since then, and it's hilarious to see that the cream of the crop of Russia's armored units are disappearing at a pretty fast rate. They've lost at this point around 13 to 15% of all of the T-90Ms they have in the Russian armed forces, and if they keep up at this rate, by the end of this war, they'll probably have lost around 20 to 30% of all of their most advanced tanks that they actually field. Let's give it up to the Russian army. I like it. Keep it up. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the last bit of location. Well, actually, that was the last bit of Location Unknown News. I was so hyped up over that bit, I was hoping that we could end on a little bit of a lower but still high note. But with that, it's now time for us to move on from the location unknowns and to move on into Kharkiv, because we have an interesting picture once again to show from the area. It's a Ukrainian landfill. Landfills are not bizarre to see, but a Ukrainian landfill filled with the remains of Russian rockets that have been fired into Kharkiv during the first month of the war is. And you can just see the sheer amount of them. From the height of this pile, it looks taller than both of these guys, and it stretches on for who knows how long out of frame. And and this is, of course, just one landfill. As far as we know, there's around 8 to 9 landfills like this around the Kharkiv area, filled with thousands of missiles and rockets of different sizes that were used to target the city of Kharkiv and hit it. And that's just a fraction of the Russian firepower that was levied against Kharkiv during the battles earlier on in the war. These only accounted, from what we know, to be about 40 to 35% of the artillery fire that was fired at that town. A large majority of the artillery fire came from, I guess you could say, artillery pieces themselves using high explosive shells, and most of those you'll never find, and if you do find them, they get blown up because they have explosive material inside of them. And so this doesn't even show the true scale of the devastation and firepower that the Russians were intent on using in destroying the city of Kharkiv, but it's a good glimpse of what really happened there in the first 3 or 4 months of the war, and now they've finally gotten around to cleaning it up. With that, we're now going to be moving into the northeastern area of the front line near Pokrovsk, Svatove, and Kreminna, and believe it or not, we have literally no news to report from this area. It's been completely stagnant. The reason being is probably because while we thought that the Ukrainians would continue offensives during the winter months, it appears that that may have actually been put on hold. It may be that the winter weather is so severe that both sides have come to a standstill, and while the Ukrainians are in a much better position than the Russians even at the current moment, they may not want to risk the fragility of their frontline supplies and in a push to try and take more ground. They may wait for more suitable weather, or they may wait for even worse weather conditions, although that never happens historically, to try and conduct a push. If the visibility is incredibly low, Ukrainians could push onto Russian lines at a very close range and pretty much assault them when they don't expect it. Also considering that poor visibility and weather conditions would stop drone reconnaissance from being used, that would also be to the Ukrainians' advantage in some kind of offensive operation in this area, and considering the snowfall we've been seeing, that might be possible. With that, we're now going to be moving on from the Bakhmut area, and I see a lot of y'all. Diosplay actually said it may be an info blackout, and that may be true. We saw something similar to this in the Chuyev and Balaklia area up until the very day that the Ukrainians broke the line, and that may be a similar case here, but we can't really talk on it because, of course, we don't really have any video evidence or picture evidence to work off of to suggest anything there. But you may be right. It may be a video blackout. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the northern area around Svatove and further down the line to Donetsk itself, where we saw in the Avdiivka area some Ukrainian soldiers defending their positions from a small Russian probing attack. And so, here's the video.
Отойдите, сзади будет РПГ. Хорошо, сын. Иду к тебе.
Uh-oh. Sounds like music.
Gotta have the music.
You gotta have the music. You can't ever just have battlefield sounds. You've gotta have music over it. I don't understand why everyone throws music on everything. The Russians do, the Ukrainians do, and it makes it very hard to cover this news sometimes because I can't hear the audio and y'all can't either. But you can see the firefight continuing. You can see this guy over here fiddling with some twine on the ground. He's just enjoying the day. It's a sunny day for him. Let him have his off time. I mean, this guy's really, really calm, actually. He's incredibly calm. He's just over there just minding his business, really. You now see this Ukrainian soldier. I believe he's firing his AK. And with that, that's the end of the video. But it's nice to see that the Ukrainian soldiers are still defending their positions in the Donetsk area and hopefully keeping the Russians at bay. And from what we can tell on the front lines, they are. With that, we're now going to be moving a little bit further behind the lines where we saw 2 Ukrainian Su-25s in flight. And I do remember that the music in this one was absolutely blasting. It would burst your eardrums out. So I know I cannot play the audio, but we can see the Su-25s flying right here. They are not flying this fast in real life. This is sped up footage. Because if they were flying this fast, these Su-25's wings would literally rip off the fuselage. They cannot fly that fast. But still, it's pretty cool to see, even though it is sped up footage. And with that, That's the end of the video, and hopefully they were able to conduct their mission without getting hit, and hopefully get some fire off on the Russians. That was pretty effective and devastating. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next area of the front lines, out of the Donetsk region, because of course Donetsk is almost a completely static front line. Neither side makes a lot of progress anymore, and of course it is because it is the Maginot Line of Ukraine, and both sides are so heavily fortified and defended, and it's been perfected over the course of 8 years of constant fighting in the area, that it's almost unthinkable to actually burst directly through that line and further into Donetsk. With that, we're going to be moving down into the area of Volodar and Pavlivka, where we have a really nice video. A Russian helicopter was shot out of the sky. It was a Ka-52, actually, one of Russia's finest. You see the cameraman looking into the distance. We can see the little black speck out there. That's the Ka-52. You can see it right there where mouse cursor circling. Ooh. And ooh, oh, he did the same thing I did, Matthew. I went ooh, and he went ooh.
Wait, I didn't see it. Back it up a little bit.
Right here. So you see that little black dot in the sky that kind of looks like a fly?
Yes.
That's the Ka-52.
Oh. Ooh. Oh.
Ah!
Oh, dang.
And it's going down immediately. Man, they got it. Oh, they got it. And also, just in case y'all didn't see it well enough right there, we actually have another angle taken from a drone. And so here's the video. They set this thing up, Matthew, like a dude-perfect video. They had guys on the ground and drones in the air to get all of the action. So here's that exact same Ka-52 from a drone camera being shot down again. So here's the video. Also, we got to mute that, but you can see the whatever that was that hit it. It actually exploded from above when you watch it. I have no idea what that even was. If anyone could give us an idea of any kind of surface-to-air missile defense system that would hit the helicopter... Hell, wait a minute. What if it was actually a Ukrainian fighter aircraft that fired off an air-to-air missile, and I guess you could say the aircraft that shot the missile was up at an altitude high enough that the missile came down on top of it, pretty much?
Could have been.
Maybe. If anyone can get, if anyone wants to hypothesize though in the live chat as to what kind of missile system that may have been, let us know, because the fact that it actually exploded on top of the helicopter downwards is very odd to see, very weird. When you see it being hit again, and it looks like the pilots didn't even eject; they just went straight down with the Ka-50, or the Ka-52, more like it. And then boom, slams into the ground, and now you can see the mushroom cloud from the explosion of the fuel and the helicopter. And that's the end of the video. And oh man, oh buddy, they got that one good. That's another Ka-52 lost, and the Russians only have about 100 of them, and from what we know, about 40 of them have already been lost. So count that one as the 41st, because that one's not coming back. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip, further down the line, past Volodar and Pavlivka, which huge credit to them for getting that done today. And we're now going to be in the area of Oktябrьsky, where we saw that a Ukrainian Leleka UAV survived a direct hit from a man-pad surface-to-air missile. This was actually insane to watch. So this Leleka is looking at some Russian forces down there. You know, it's just doing its job. They're getting some good recon, and boom, it gets hit by a man-pad, and then it just keeps flying. It's just like, oh, well. You know, it's like, well, let's keep on with the mission. You see the hit right there, and it still keeps going. It's not falling out of the sky or anything. It's fine. Now, that is advertisement for Leleka right there. I think that the United States should start buying some Leleka drones. And let me get Leleka 100. I believe it's a Leleka 100. Yep, it's this one. This is the drone that got hit by a man-pad. That's how big it is. And that's what it looks like. And this thing got hit directly by a man-pad, as you could see, and somehow still continued to fly. Now, if that isn't durability, I don't know what is. Because that right there is just impressive.
Have you think it maybe exploded, like, right off the side of it, like, before it hit it?
Or, I don't know, because let's watch that again. Upon close review, that actually did hit the aircraft, and you could see parts flying off of it. Like, right here. You see like a little piece of string. You see a little piece of plastic right there flying off.
That's wild.
Like, it got blown to pieces and it's still flying. And they still have connection to it. That's probably the craziest thing. Have you ever wanted the durability and the precision flying of your own kind of drone, well, you ought to get yourself a Leleka 100. This thing can take a hit and keep flying. Anyways, we're not going to do that voice for too long, but still, unbelievably impressive and great manufacturing and quality provided by the Leleka company. With that, we're now going to be moving a little bit further down the front lines into the area of Uruzhane, where we saw that 3 Russians were captured today as well. I wonder if these are the guys that fired that manpad.
Добрий вечір, ми з України. От цих підарасів ведемо. Слава Україні.
With that, that's the end of the video. I'm going to be moving on to the next one. And also, Matthew, going back to that drone, when you're flying your $1,000 Leleka drone and they hit you with that dollar store manpad.
Yes.
Oh, man. Anyways, we're now going to be moving down to Mariupol, down off the front lines, and in the middle of nowhere at this point. At one point, a long time ago, in case if y'all are new to the Ukraine war, y'all may have not known this, but Mariupol was one of the most ferocious and savage battlefields in the entirety of Ukraine. On around the 90th day of the war in Ukraine, nearly 200 days ago at this point, the city of Mariupol and its garrison finally fell to the Russian forces, and the Azovstal was taken, a large metallurgical plant that's in the center of the city. Afterwards, the Russians have occupied the town for nearly 6 or 7 months at this point in the war, and they've made no attempt whatsoever to improve the lives of the Ukrainians that are still living there, which once again shows their dedication to this quote-unquote liberation operation and making sure that the Ukrainians don't subjugate these people to suffering and death. And we can see right here that the conditions that Ukrainians are living in Mariupol is incredibly poor. The temperature is now dropped below freezing, and people are living with busted-out windows in buildings that hardly have walls. Here's the video.
Город Мариуполь. 4 декабря 2022 года. 2 часа ночи. На улице минус 5 градусов. Шквальным ветром порвало очередной раз пленку на окнах в моей квартире. Комсомольский бульвар, дом 66. Квартира 35. Я Зондер Андрей Валерьевич. Показываю вам, в каких условиях мы находимся в своих квартирах. Температура сейчас в квартире плюс 1 градус. Приходится ночью вместо сна восстанавливать пленку на окнах, которая порвана ветром, вся разорванная. Начинаю работу.
He's a brave man giving out his address like that.
He is a very brave man, and it's very sad to think that everyone in Mariupol is living in conditions like this, considering that all the buildings of Mariupol were almost entirely destroyed to the point that they will be condemned once it's liberated by the Ukrainians later. The other thing that's also something important to remember, and a lot of people have been saying this, is that the cold doesn't hurt anyone. People have survived for thousands of years through the cold. It won't mean much, but a lot of these people forget that these people survived the winter for thousands of years because they were able to have a fire. And Ukrainians in modern apartment buildings do not have any place to actually start a fire without dying from carbon monoxide because there's no proper ventilation. And so a lot of these people are without any kind of ability to warm the houses that they live in and also be protected from the elements at the same time. And so these people are pretty much being subjected to freezing to death, and anything below the temperature of freezing and even close to freezing, a little bit above it, people can die from exposure in those kinds of weather conditions. And you can see that the Russians have made no attempt, once again, to try and help out these people. It's all about trying to conduct this war really more so for Russia's strategic interests, and the whole dog and pony show that they gave the public and the world a while ago about trying to liberate the Ukrainians, of course, was a complete lie. And you can see it whenever they actually have to take care of Ukrainians, they never do. And so with that, we're now moving out of the Mariupol city area, and once again, huge credit and honor to the defenders of the Azovstal and the defenders of Mariupol, who nearly 200 days ago surrendered to the Russians after holding out on a siege of unbelievable proportions for nearly 90 straight days of war. With that, we're now going to be moving on from the rest of the front lines of Ukraine. There was no news to report from Mariupol, and there was no more news from the Zaporizhia front. And so now it's time to go full circle, all the way back to Kyiv, where we saw the pizza man delivering his delicious pizza to the masses. And it's time for us to see the address from President Volodymyr Zelensky on the 285th day of war. And so without further ado, Here's the speech from the man, the myth, the legend, Volodymyr Zelensky.
Незламний народи незламної країни. Минає 4-й день цієї зими, яка буде складною. Це зрозуміло, але все ж таки варто сприймати цю зиму не як випробування, а як час. Час, що наближає нас до головного, до перемоги. Кожен з цих 90 зимових днів. Ворог дуже сподівається використати зиму проти нас, зробити зимовий холод і труднощі частиною свого терору. Ми ж маємо зробити все, щоб вистояти цю зиму. Як би це не було важко. Вистояти, і ми вистоїмо. Вистояти цією зимою – це відстояти все. У Росії ще поки є ракети і перевага в артилерії. Так, але у нас є те, чого окупант не має і не матиме. Ми захищаємо свій дім, а це дає нам найсильнішу мотивацію з можливих. Ми боремось за свободу, а це завжди примножує будь-яку силу. Ми захищаємо правду, а це об'єднує навколо України весь світ. Ми бачимо щасливих людей, коли вони зустрічають український прапор у звільнених містах всюди, куди повертається Україна. Повертаються люди, ЗСУ, всі ми. А це означає, що нас чекають всюди, де ще є окупація. Чекають і вірять, що Україна повернеться. Чекають і добре знають. Знають, якщо Росія вдерлася, то це не назавжди. Щоб пройти цю зиму, ми маємо ще більше допомагати одне одному, ніж будь-коли. І ще більше дбати про одне одного. І не питайте, будь ласка, чи допомогти і чим. Просто допомагайте, коли бачите, що можете це зробити. Щоб пройти зиму, ми маємо бути ще більш стійкими і ще більш єдиними, ніж будь-коли. Не можна допускати жодних внутрішніх конфліктів і чвар, які можуть послабити нас усіх. Навіть якщо хтось там думає, що це якось посилить його, особисто треба ще більше взаємодії, ніж будь-коли. Вся Україна має стати одним великим пунктом незламності і працювати щодня, працювати щоночі, держава, бізнес, люди, всі ми, українці, усі разом. Цієї осені було зроблено багато, щоб посилити позиції держави, щоб окупант втрачав. Ми маємо робити все, щоб і після цієї зими можна було сказати те саме. Українці працювали цілодобово, щоб відновити нормальність життя після російських ударів. І яким би масштабним не був терор окупантів, наше бажання відновити все в нашому домі завжди було ще більш масштабним. Так має бути і надалі. Наші сили оборони міцно тримають позиції і навіть найскладніші напрямки. Скільки разів вже окупанти збиралися захопити весь Донбас, бути в Бахмуті. Скільки разів вони вже оголошували нові терміни свого просування, своїх перемог. Наші хлопці – справжні герої. І саме це наше ключове завдання і держави, і народу – робити все, щоб підтримати наші сили оборони, щоб зміцнити наші сили оборони, знайти в світі для них, для сил наших оборони усе потрібне. Я знаю, як складно на Бахмуті, в Донбасі. Хлопці, тримайтесь, я з вами, народ з вами. Щоб це завдання виконати, щоб виконати успішно, саме для цього ми маємо завжди підтримувати одне одного. І я дякую усім, хто допомагає посилювати Україну. І хто після цієї зими обов'язково зможе сказати, що наближення нашої перемоги – це також і його, чи її особистий результат, особисте досягнення. Слава усім, хто воює за Україну і хто працює для українців. Слава нашому міцному народу. Слава Україні.
That is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 285 of the war in Ukraine. And that wraps up the end of the speech from President Zelensky here on this day of war. I want to remind you all once again that the Lee Spring Army is an incredibly special organization, an incredibly special group of people. And I've got to say that what we've done tonight, raising $7.3 thousand in support of World Central Kitchen, is something that, once again, the Lee Spring Army can be unbelievably proud for. It is now the 38th fundraiser that we've run in this war, 38 fundraisers, 38 weeks of Sundays where we have supported Ukraine through multiple nonprofits. And I think it's absolutely impressive that all of you have once again continued to help push home the idea and the thought of helping out Ukrainians the best we can. And I've got to thank you all so much once again. If y'all would like to help us to reach more people and let more people know about this, hit the like button on this stream and spread the word about what the Lee Spring Army has done here tonight. Go everywhere you can. Go to pro-Russian channels, pro-Ukrainian channels. Go high, go low, go everywhere and tell people who y'all are and what y'all do. And help people to join in this cause. It is unbelievable to think we've done it again. I didn't think, actually, tonight that we would pass the fundraising goal, yet we blew it away again. We've never stopped blowing away fundraiser goals. And it's thanks to all of y'all. And I want y'all to continue to grow as a group, to grow as a force. The Lee Spring Army ought to be something to be reckoned with. It ought to be something when people hear about it on the internet, they go, that's a fine group of people right there. And I've never heard anyone else say anything otherwise. And if they do say that, they probably don't have the best interests in mind, because I don't know who in the world could look at y'all and think that y'all aren't an admirable group of people. And so with that, thank you so much, all of y'all, once again, for watching tonight's news, and long live the Lee Spring Army. With that, we're now going to be moving into our question segment, where we're going to be answering as many questions as we can for the remainder of the night. We'll probably be here until the midway mark of the next hour, and we'll also be, once again, recognizing all of the top donors who have been able to help the Lee Spring Army to get this far. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so we have reached $7.4 thousand on the fundraiser, and also shout out to Palip Sirapat for putting in a $100 donation, as well as Carla Thomas, for also putting in a $100. Aldo Schmidak puts in a $50, and Tone Romes puts in a $50 as well. So thank you very much for that, and we have surpassed the goal tremendously. So once again, thanks, folks. We do appreciate that very much, and the Ukrainians will definitely appreciate it as well. Enforcer, I see a ton of folks asking, what is the total amount to date? And obviously, without adding it all up on the stream, what is your best guess?
I believe we're somewhere close to $640,000 or $650,000. But I'm actually going to go through, if you would like to carry us through everyone who's supported us tonight on this fundraiser. If you could do that, I'm also going to be over here.
Already done.
Oh, well, oh man, dang it. I was hoping it would be longer. But if you want to lead us into the next poll, and also, I guess you could say, fill in for a second, I can go through and try and add all of them together.
Okay, all right. So anyways, we have two polls to address, and the first one said, have you ever opened a can from the wrong side? It looks like 66% said no, 34% said yes. On this one, I've got to say, I've never opened a can from the wrong side. I always use the pull tab. I've never had to, start opening one from the bottom and then realize it has a pull tab on top. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that I have never done that personally. I have cut my hand on one of those pop-open top cans before. Like, it was a really stupid mix-up that I did. But me personally, I've never done anything that stupid. So with that, I think I would have to fall within the 60% who said they had never done that. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the second one said, was the footage of the Su-25s sped up? It looks like a pretty evenly split poll, surprisingly. 47% said not sure, 27% said yes, it was sped up footage, and 26% said no, it was normal footage. Now for me, I've got to say it looks kind of normal. Now, I know the Enforcer was saying it was sped up, but I think they can actually go that fast in real life. But Enforcer, what say you on that one?
I would say, and once again, I'm trying to make sure that I keep my place on the fundraiser. I would say that was sped up. Su-25s only travel at a speed of around 600 miles per hour at the fastest, and that video was sped up so quickly that it looked like they were going about 1,000 or 1,100 miles per hour. So I would have to say that it was sped up, and also due to how fast they were able to turn their wings, they also weren't able to pull that off as well. That would be a little bit too fast of a turn rate for an Su-25. And so with that, Matthew, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep adding. I'm almost through them, actually. I'm about halfway through. But with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so that was our last poll, so we're moving on to our questions, and we have a whole bunch of really good ones. So first up, we have a question from Brian DeLauro. who says, have you heard of the Ukrainian genocide 1932 to 33 winter when Stalin let them starve to death?
Yes, that is actually, I believe, called the Holodomor, and it's where pretty much a state-ran famine swept over the entirety of Ukraine and ended up killing countless millions of Ukrainians. That wasn't the only time that the Russians would commit an atrocity against the Ukrainians. In 1946 and 1947, another famine would wreck the nation of Ukraine, and then in 1949, they pretty much came through and they started to once again just kind of purge the Ukrainian culture once more and kill as many Ukrainians as they could. And so with that, I hope that does answer that question fairly well. And the Russians have always treated the Ukrainians in modern history like third-class citizens. And oddly enough, the Russians are nothing more than an offshoot of Ukrainian culture that's on steroids. All Slavic culture pretty much originates from the Kievan Rus that started off in the middle of Ukraine, in the area of Kiev. That's why it's called the Kievan Rus. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so up next we have a question from Savitania, who says, if Ukraine takes back Crimea, is it possible for Ukraine to take more Russian land?
I believe it is. If they did take back Crimea, I don't think they would want to take back more Russian land because the Ukrainians aren't looking for a total victory, kind of like, I guess you could say, nations would have done in the Second World War. The war is entirely defensive from Ukraine's goal, and while they do have offensive, I guess you could say, doctrine now and offensive goals, those offensive goals are all just intended to regain the ground that they lost at the onset of the war in the first week and also about 8 years ago in 2014. And so in those instances, I would actually have to say they would not push into Russia. They will just retake all of the land that they've lost so far, hopefully including Crimea, and then the war will come to an end, or it will simmer on forever because the Russians will never sign a peace treaty. It'll be one or the other, but I feel that eventually the Russians would want to officially end the war. Otherwise, economic sanctions and hardships will wreck their country and plague it for the rest of all time. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Mason Dockel, who says, question, why can't we crank out weapons like we did in World War II? Is it too advanced or because U.S. is not at war? And thank you.
The reason why we're not able to produce the amount of weapons that they had in the Second World War is because they are just technologically more difficult to produce. A Su-27 has more components and more parts inside of it, I believe if I'm correct, than around 3 or 4 B-17s would have had. And it's an incredibly complex system. Modern weapons are also a lot more expensive to produce as well, and for that reason, you have to produce a smaller amount of them. They can also do a much better job. For example, the range of an Su-27 in terms of what it can engage is somewhere out around 150 miles and even further, depending on the missiles it's using. And so you don't necessarily need a massive amount of equipment in a modern war just because a single fighter aircraft can cover such a massive area, and that's also why you don't see a large amount of aircraft being produced and I guess you could say a large military being fielded. Also, on top of that, due to the doctrine of I guess you could say, well, really, I guess you could, in the United States and the Russians' perspective, of a prepared readiness at a constant state, the military is already at its mobilized state in terms of its size, with the Russians having around 1.1 million soldiers inside their entire military, and the United States having around, I believe, 1.2 million total, or 1.3 million, not including the reservists. Those are pretty much the full mobilized scale that they would be to start off a war like you had already been mobilized for it. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, because that's kind of the reason why you don't see mass levels of production. And also on top of that, to produce these weapons, you have to have a massive global supply chain to ever produce anything. Like, for example, an iPhone requires resources from, I believe, around 27 entirely separate countries to be produced, not because they're wanting to encourage foreign trade and open themselves up to foreign markets, but because some of the materials are only found in certain countries and can be mined from them, and so they require to conduct trade with that country to just make something as simple as a phone. And a lot of weapon systems also run into similar issues. That's also why Russia isn't able to produce anything, because they've been cut off from all of that entirely. And so with that,
and also when we're at war, we always invoke the Defense Production Act to speed up production, don't we?
That is also true as well, but we rarely ever find ourselves in a war where we have to produce that much equipment anymore, and I don't believe the Defense Production Act has been called up for about the past, I would say, at least 50 years. But if we ever
for COVID it did.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. But I'm talking about I was actually talking about for war, but you're right. It was called up like just last year or 2 years ago. But that wasn't really a war. But we can do that really.
It was a war against the invisible enemy.
as they called it. But with that, I hope that does address the question the best we can. And I actually did get that wrong. Thank you for Matthew for correcting me on that one. I'm sure the live chat is flaming me, but I'm still trying to add up these figures over here in the middle of talking. And I hope I'm answering questions coherently, because I'm almost done with the spreadsheet over here. I only have 4 more fundraisers to put in. So if y'all want to just hang out for a second, I'm about to have that number for y'all. So 1 second.
All right. And while we're hanging out, we're also at 2.4 thousand likes as well. So if you want to hit the like button, if you're still here, hopefully we can reach maybe 3,000 tonight. That would be a good goal to reach. And also we're at 7.5 thousand now, so we're still reaching even higher on the fundraiser. And also, just if you're curious, while the Enforcer's finishing up there, it looks like we have about 15 or so live chat questions that we can answer. So if you have one for us, feel free to send it to me, because I have a feeling we'll run through those 15 pretty quick. But in the meantime,
yes. This is bad. I actually was about to belt out the number because it's way higher than we actually have been telling everyone. But I feel like we need about $400 more in donations, because this number is not symbolically good. We have raised $666,000 in support of Ukraine. Now y'all see why I'm wanting to see a little bit of more of an increase, because we're at 666, and that's not really a good number. I would really like to see it to be like 667 at least or something. But you know, I don't want to ask too much. But anyways, we have actually raised about $30,000 more than I ever thought we had at this point. So congratulations to the Lee Spring Army. I remember it was not too long ago, Matthew, that we were celebrating $500,000 raised. Now we're already up to around $670,000, and we're getting really close to $750,000 total.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I can see $1 million coming in the near future.
That would be nuts if it did. And I think at that point we would really have to start plugging ourselves on. Say what?
What was that number again?
Well, I said it before, Matthew. I don't think you were catching on, but it's 666. That's why I said we need $700 more, because it's 666,362. And if we get like $600 more in fundraiser support tonight, we can bump that up to 667,000.
Folks, we need to have another general order very quickly. We need to get off that number.
If should we start? I don't know if we should start another general order for that, because I don't want to abuse them. You know, we've already done one tonight, but at the same time, that's kind of an odd number. You know what I mean? You know, I'm looking at
that's very odd.
Like I added it up, and I was like, whoa! I was like, wait a minute. I was like, that's not great. But anyways, if y'all and watch this, Matthew. Someone's going to sit out there and go, and he said the fundraisers were this total. He's the devil. Like watch the Russian propagandist on Russian TV sit there and point out our channel for that and say it's the same. They're devils, you know, or something.
Yes, well, that's the Russians' go-to. Everybody's a devil except for them.
Yeah, you know, but at the same time, they have some of the most hellish-looking people in some instances. But anyways. Congratulations, everyone, once again, for even getting this far. While it's $666,000, I'm kind of a little taken off by the number, like the symbolism of the 100,000 number, but still, $666,000 raised. Can y'all believe that?
Hey, Magic Sky Girl just put in 100.
Hey, I think we're about 400 away at this point of getting away from that number. But still, I mean,
every donation you put in keeps the devil away.
Yeah, one donation a day keeps the devil away. Now we sound like Tetzel during the Martin Luther's Reformation in the 1400s. If you pay, your sins are repented. But anyways, it's pretty wild to see that number. But still, that is way higher than we ever thought it would get. $600,000, $670. We're gonna round it up anyways. $670,000 raised in support of Ukraine, and it's been thanks to all of y'all. I can't think of another channel out there who has ever raised that much in support. If they have, they don't make it public. But still, it's Unbelievable. The Leespring Army is the greatest thing on earth. And that's why I love you people, because what other group out there? I'm not the head of this group. I'm only the spokesperson for it. But what other group out there has been able to do so much greatness? I can't think of any other on YouTube that's been at this level. So with that, we're getting really...
Pell Rider puts in a $100 donation.
Thank you, Pell Rider. I think we're about $200 away from the start of getting away from that number. So we're only like $200 away. So if anyone wants to help out with that, we can make it $667,000 instead of $666. And I think we're getting really close now. I think we're only 50 bucks
Granny's
away.
2 cents put in a 150 Canadian.
I gotta say, okay, I think we're just 50. No, we would be like $30 away. Would we? I think we're $30 away. Also, someone said the name of the biggest YouTube channel out there. Every time I say him, our channel almost gets obliterated. I have no idea why. It's a very odd coincidence. But yeah, you know, he has probably done more for them. But beyond him, and he's kind of an anomaly, so I don't really rule him in as a normal YouTube channel. He's more like a brand that just happens to be on YouTube. I can't think of anyone else who was done better. So...
$8,000.
Hey! And I think we're only 25 away at this point. No, I think we're $15 away from this point. 50. Can anyone put in $15, please? I just want to see it go up to 667 because 666 is not.
RF from USA put in a 50.
All right, we got it up to 667. Now we can get off that. Thank you so much, RF from USA, for helping us to get rid of that foul number. Heresy. But thank you so much once again, everyone, for helping us to raise $8,100 tonight. Hell, I mean, like, that's a good fundraiser. We're feeding a lot of people with that. And if we assume that an average meal provided by, let me think. Yeah, World Central Kitchen.
How much would an average meal be?
Let's say it's $1.50, because I feel like that would be the average for bulk supplies being cooked up quickly.
That's 5,400 meals.
5,400 meals. We just fed a small town in Ukraine for a whole day.
That's really good to think. Like, really, like, seriously. We're actually making a difference here on the channel. That is actually impressive.
We actually are. I mean, like, that's really crazy to me. It's nuts. We fed just 5,400 people running this stream tonight. And that's how much work the Leespring Army puts in such a short amount of time that we're able to do this. But enough about y'all. That sounds funny. Enough about y'all. It's time for us to actually get back to y'all's questions, because all of y'all are here for the news. And one thing we want to make sure is that we continue to cover the news and also answer y'all's questions that are news related. Also, please make sure to subscribe again. If you are enjoying this channel right now and you've liked what we've done so far in this little segment, make sure to subscribe, because this happens every day of the week but tomorrow. So with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Little 721, who says, do we consider the Wagner group a terrorist group?
I would consider them a terrorist group. They've done incredibly horrendous things both in Syria and in Ukraine, and so I would say that they are a terrorist group, because who the hell commits atrocities like them and doesn't get considered one? If anything, if they weren't called a terrorist group, I would put them up there similar to the Waffen SS in Germany during the 1940s. They're very similar to that. And so with that, I hope that answers that question, in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Colin Walker, who says, let's see, do you and the Enforcer think when Putin goes for full mobilization that there will be mass protests from the Russian people and Putin will fall? And I'll say, for me, there will definitely be mass protests, but I doubt Putin's going to fall.
I would say that if there is a partial mobilization, I don't think a total mobilization is going to happen yet. I think it'll be another partial mobilization, because there's still plenty of reservists to pull from. If they do another partial mobilization, there will be unrest. I don't think it'll be enough to have Putin ousted, because the first time it happened, it actually was not that severe, and they cracked down really quickly on the rioters and rebels. And so I think they'll be able to do that again, and Putin will stay in power. I think the only time we'll see Putin get removed, unfortunately, is at the very end, well, after this war. Once the war ends and its defeat for Russia, the Russian public will see how much they were lied to. There will be massive protests and demonstrations in the street. They'll probably go violent. The military will turn against Putin, and by then he'll have to flee, or else he'll probably get killed or put in prison. And so I think that's most likely how it will go, but I don't think he'll be deposed during a partial mobilization. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, and we are on to the next one.
And the next question goes to Mad Machine, who says, could Ukraine seize Russian territory in order to trade it back for seized Ukrainian land?
Can you read off that one again? That sounded like something brand new, like incredibly original.
It was very original. Mad Machine is very smart. Mad Machine says, could Ukraine seize Russian territory in order to trade it back for seized Ukrainian land?
Oh, crap, they could. I mean, I don't know if that would work with Russia. I don't know how they would view the Ukrainians taking towns like Belgorod and Kursk, but I would say probably. It's something that is actually worthwhile thinking about. That was an incredibly neat idea. I wouldn't really know because you would have to get in the minds of the Russian politicians and leaders, which I can't do. But I would say that that is a pretty interesting option that the Ukrainians might want to look into and see how Russian diplomats and officials may respond to. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. That was original right there. I've never heard a question like that before. That was a really good one. And with that, we're going to be on to the next one. But I want to read off something funny to y'all because I saw you get this guy and I got to get a good laugh out of this. Some guy called Keith Howell said, will I have blood on my hands by donating? They're literally
no. You'll have food. You'll be putting out food, not blood.
The fundraiser is for the fundraiser is for World Central Kitchen, and this guy is trying to make it sound like we're funding death camps in the middle of Siberia. I'm sorry, but that's something that the Russians do. We don't. World Central Kitchen doesn't do that. That was about the dumbest question I've ever seen tonight so far from a bot. And so with that, we are on to the next one. We're probably getting ganged up on at this point, Matthew, by Chinese bots and Russian bots, considering the videos I've been making. By the way, if y'all didn't see it, we did come out with a new video today. Let me see if I can show it to y'all, because I would highly encourage y'all watch it, because it's kind of a new endeavor that we've been doing on the side, is trying to come up with new interesting videos for y'all to watch that are expanding beyond Ukraine and talking about other stuff. Yesterday, we actually did a video on the collapse of modern-day China, and due to popular request from that video, we also made a second video today on the Chinese Civil War in between 1945 and 1949 and everything leading up to it. And so if you would be interested in seeing a video explaining what happened then in our way, in kind of like our form, make sure to go check it out. And also, it seems as though it wasn't really pushed a lot analytically. YouTube doesn't really like the topic of China much at all, and so they automatically boot it down if you put any kind of tags about China in it. Make sure to share it on your Facebook, your Instagram, and your Twitter, so that way people can go and see this video, click on it, and watch it, so that way it can actually spread around. But with that, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. It was something new for me today. And also, let me know, did y'all like this thumbnail? Because I thought it was pretty cool. It's got a big neon line down the middle separating the sides. You got the Communist Chinese on one side with Mao, and you've got the Nationalist Chinese with Shanghai Shek on the other. And I mean, I thought it looked pretty good. It kind of looks like an Avengers movie poster in a way.
It does. Do you say Shanghai Shrek?
Shanghai Shek.
Okay. I thought I heard something else.
Also another interesting thing I didn't mention in this video because it wasn't relevant is that Shanghai Shek actually got the nickname from the U.S. forces, Cash My Check, in the Second World War, because the guy was so corrupt then that you could pretty much just bribe the guy to do whatever you wanted, even if it wasn't in the interest of the Chinese. You could just pay him and he would do it. And so they gave him the nickname Cash My Check because it sounds like Shanghai Shek. But anyways, that's something for another time, for a video maybe. But with that, it's time for us to move on to the next question. And I hope y'all do check out that video and like it.
All right, and up next we have a question from Eric Drake, who says, what are both of your thoughts on whether Ukraine will invade or lay siege to Crimea? Also, how long will it take? Now, for me personally, I think that laying siege to Crimea will probably be the last thing the Ukrainians actually do in the war before they conclude it. But I don't think it's going to be something they're doing in the next few weeks. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. It's going to be one of the last things they do just due to its geographical isolation compared to the rest of the front lines. The Ukrainians are most likely going to be trying to cut off the DPR and the LPR in the north by flanking their defensive lines and heading towards Luhansk. And they'll also be pushing towards Melitopol as well. Once they fracture the front lines into multiple pieces and then chomp up each one, they'll then focus on Crimea. Now, one thing I will be definite about is that the Ukrainians will attempt to retake Crimea. They're going to start pushing into it like it's another part of their country. And I do think that if it isn't for the Russians threatening nuclear weapons or maybe even using them, which leads into World War III, they will retake Crimea with ease. We've seen that they've been taking massive amounts of ground already, and so there's no doubt that they'll be able to do that as well. The only question that comes into play, it's not the question of can the Ukrainians do it. It's the question of will the Russians allow it? Because the Russians, while they don't have a military to stand on anymore and one that can actually defend what they've taken, they do have a nuclear arsenal that they can still try and use against the Ukrainians if they were to try and take Crimea. And considering the strategic interest the Russians have involved in Sevastopol port and what they consider that in terms of the future of their country and its strategic importance and its standing around the world, they may actually try and defend that with nuclear arms. But at the same time, if we're just talking about this from the conventional perspective and nuclear arms are ruled out of the equation, the Ukrainians can roll through Crimea and take it without a problem. It will be the last thing they do in the war, however. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. Also, big shout out to Michelle Dry for putting in a $50 donation. Thank you, Michelle, for that. We are now up to 8.4 thousand thanks to that donation. So the fundraiser is still going very strong, even this late into the stream. But up next, we have a question from Corrupt Despair, who says, what do you guys think about the new defense pact with Russians and Belarus?
The Russians and Belarus. That wouldn't actually be new. I think you may be talking about the CSTO, which would make that redundant, considering that that is a united alliance of countries surrounding Russia that say that they'll defend each other if they get invaded. That turned out not to be true because they didn't actually hold that up with the Armenians or the Azerbaijanis when the Nagorno-Karabakh war started in 2020 and once again in 2022. But it is something that they say will be enforced. And so I don't think that's anything new. That would be just pretty much redundant and a symbolic thing to do because the CSTO already guarantees that defensive alliance. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you to the anonymous viewer who just donated $100. You just got us up to $8.5 thousand. And then also I see a lot of people saying that they're trying to share that video, the Chinese video, onto their social media platforms like Facebook, and a lot of y'all are getting an error message when trying to copy that link and paste it. So real quick, actually, let me pull up my Twitter.
I think folks were talking about an error like in the live chat.
Oh, you can't post links in Twitter. I mean, in the live chat. You can't post links there. But you can post the link elsewhere, because we have it where it's disabled in the live chat to post links, because back in the day when you could, we had scammers coming through trying to have people click links to invest in Bitcoin or their own fundraisers and probably scam people. So
FTX.
Yeah, anyone want a Bitcoin? But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a question from Tom Exman, who says, what will happen Ukraine doesn't put forces in Crimea, but just bombs the port and bases in it, make it unusable to Russia, ?
If they bomb the port and the bases within Crimea, which they've actually done pretty well at this point, we saw that a lot of airfields in Crimea have now been abandoned due to the fact that they are now within missile range of the Ukrainians, and they eliminated a lot of Russian aircraft on their airfields because of it. The airfields wouldn't be a concern. The only thing that the Russians would have of importance that the Ukrainians would want to still hit would be Sevastopol port. And if they were able to do that, they would be able to destroy the port for a while, but the Russians, considering how important it is, would repair it within a pretty small time frame, probably around a month or 2 months, and it would be operational, once again, up to spec for the Russian Navy to use. The Ukrainians would have to continuously bombard Sevastopol without stopping for months on end to make sure that the effect remains. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Mech Tactical, who says, can you please ask why we aren't seeing a whole lot of tank action lately?
The reason why we're not seeing a lot of tank action lately from the Russian side is probably because they're starting to run out of modern tanks, and they're starting to realize how stretched their armored forces really are, and considering that they're having to pull a lot of T-62Ms out of storage to try and have any kind of armor whatsoever, it's really starting to hit the bottom line of their supply depots that, hey, we don't have a lot left, and we really need to start conserving the tanks we now have out there, although they're old and aged. And so they're now starting to use their armor less, and the infantry are having to push forward, like in the area of Bakhmut, without any support whatsoever, and that's also leading to them making no ground at all, because Now they don't even have the support of larger guns to back up the infantry as they try and push forward, and now they're left to fend for themselves out there. And we can see that it wasn't even going well with armor support, and now without armor support, they're not making any ground. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And also, Buddy just summarized it up into one word, even better than what I was saying, and it's another instance of why they're not using them, which is mud. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Granny's 2 cents, who says, would you explain how they count the dead orcs and arrive at those numbers? Thank you.
And thank you. And one thing I got to say, this is something we always have to say, is that casualty numbers are never exact. And while I do quote off those numbers like it's the Bible, they may be, well, they are wrong. There's no way to exactly know how many Russian soldiers are being killed per day. And that's why you pull up World War II, World War I, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, all of the casualty numbers are always going to be estimates on the enemy side. For some reason, we're always able to come up with the exact casualty numbers for every single country that's in our alliance, but whenever we talk about other countries, we never really know for certain. So we don't know how accurate these are. We know that they're fairly accurate because whenever the Russians at the beginning of the war actually released their casualty numbers, they were quite high. At one point, the Ukrainians said the Russians had lost 10,000 killed, and then about a week later, the Russian government officially came out and said that 10,000 Russian soldiers had been killed at that point in the war. And so that was our marker way at the beginning to show that the Ukrainians are mostly accurate in their casualty reports on the Russians, but beyond that, we have no other way to really corroborate these numbers and make sure that they're accurate or not. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Diego Gomez, who says, do you think the Russian troops are sabotaging themselves, and that's why they are losing the war?
I don't think they're sabotaging themselves sometimes, because for the most part, it seems like a lot of Russians are really gung-ho to get up to the front and try and fight. I think what's really holding them back is their lack of training and how scared they actually get when they get there. And they get so scared that it appears that they're sabotaging themselves, but what they're really trying to do is just run away, regardless of what it leads them to. That's why T-90Ms are abandoned intact. If they were trying to sabotage themselves, they would make sure that T-90M never even made it to the front line for themselves to be in danger. Instead, we see that they go to the front lines with the T-90M, that gets fired upon by artillery, and they bail out of the tank before it's even hit, and they go running off. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, but at least according to what we know. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Mark King, who says, what do you think about the reason for the war is because the citizens of Crimea are mad, and they were going to rise up against Russia because they are worse now than they were without?
Can you reread the start of that one again, about the first 7 words?
What do you think about the reason for the war is because the citizens of Crimea are mad?
The reason for this war, and trying to summarize this in a nutshell and not go through all the incredible difficult details, well, the incredibly complicated details, is that Crimea has always been a strategically important port for the Russians since imperial times. The Black Sea Fleet, one of their most important fleets, is based out of there, and it's crucially important compared to every other port they have because it never freezes over at any point in the year. And so the Russian Navy can only operate from that port at all times. And so for that reason, it's strategically important. In 2014, during the Maidan Revolution, and the pro-Russian government under Yanukovych was overthrown and a new government came into power. Actually, I think I may have gotten that wrong. I think Yanukovych was the first president after the Maidan. Anyways, they overthrew the pro-Russian government and a pro-European government came into being in Ukraine. The Russians were scared that if the Ukrainians tried to join the European Union, one of those conditions would be that the Ukrainians have to throw the Russians out of Sevastopol port. And because of that, they immediately began a special military operation back then. It was actually a special military operation to quickly spring out of Sevastopol. They actually sent brigades from Sevastopol port outwards into the rest of Crimea to enclose Ukrainians inside of their bases and annex the peninsula without a shot fired. At the exact same time, they funded Russian-backed separatists inside of Donetsk and Luhansk to rise up with a load of Russian support. From what we know now, around 70 to 80% of the DPR and LPR's initial forces in 2014 were compromised of little green men, which were Russian armed forces that didn't have any insignia on them, that helped them to rise up and fight against the Ukrainians to make it look like it was a organic thing that happened inside of Ukraine, where Russian-speaking people thought that the pro-EU government was going to treat them poorly and they wanted to be a part of Russia now. And so that's really why this war started. You know, you can fill in the rest of the pieces from there all the way up till February 24th, 2022, and then up until today. But that's really why the war started, is because the Russians wanted port rights to Sevastopol permanently, because without it, the Russian Navy wouldn't be able to operate for around 3 months out of every year. And then what really kicked off this phase of the war is that the Ukrainians were trying to join the European Union and NATO, but most importantly NATO, which is our defensive alliance in the West, and it's actually a pretty cushy one if you can get into it. And the Russians were scared at that point that U.S. forces would be within hitting distance of Volgograd, and they were also scared that foreign pressure anyways was going to be put on them to give back Crimea and also the DPR and LPR. And so they annexed the DPR and LPR, and they started the war now. So I hope that explains why we got here today and why it's like this. But really, in the end, it all just boils down to the port rights. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Aldo Schmedak, who says, would it be wise to hit the Crimean Bridge while workers are there to slow up and future repairs too?
Yes. If a worker is working on a bridge, it's just kind of summed up as, you know, it's an acceptable casualty. If it was just civilians just crossing, you know, going for a stroll with their dog, that's not really acceptable. But if it's crews working on helping to fix some of the shortcomings of the Russians at this point logistically, they too are also targets in a way. And so it's kind of acceptable for that reason. Kind of doesn't really sound right when you say it out loud like that, but that's war. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Thorn, who says, have pro-Russian Ukrainian oligarchs encouraged Putin to go to war with Ukraine?
I don't believe the oligarchs actually encouraged Putin to go to war with Ukraine, because as far as it's been concerned for them, things have gone incredibly poorly, and they've now ended up fleeing the country and living everywhere else, and now they're slowly falling out of windows one after the other. So I don't believe the oligarchs actually encouraged Putin to go to war with Ukraine. If anything, I think that they were actually...
Well, the pro-Russian Ukrainian ones.
The pro-Russian Ukrainian oligarchs.
The oligarchs in Ukraine that are pro-Russian.
I haven't actually heard a lot about them, and I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one because I don't really have enough information to go off of what they were doing. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Jethro Bradley, who says, why aren't we seeing more big HIMARS strikes behind enemy lines? Do you think they are happening and not being reported by either side?
I think they're happening, but they're not being reported by Russia because it's an embarrassment, and they're not being reported by Ukraine because they aren't really able to get video footage to show what they're really doing. So that's probably why we're not seeing a large amount of HIMARS strikes. We used to see them a lot when the Ukrainians were on offensives and they were destroying Russian supply depots at an unprecedented rate, but nowadays we don't see that much because most of what Ukraine is hitting is so far behind the lines, drones can't really get there and spot for the missiles that are coming down from above. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up we have a question from Portstan, who says, Enforcer, I read today that the Iran Shahed drones don't operate in freezing weather. That's why we haven't seen any lately. What are your thoughts?
That may be true. At the same time, they may also not be used because the Russians have run out of them. They were used in a high volume for a very short amount of time, and if we're assuming that they only got about 100 or 200 of them, they may have used all of them in the span of a couple of weeks, and they've now run out of them, and that may also be a reason. But also the weather is another good reason. But then again, I don't believe that's true, because they only use a simple two-stroke motor, which isn't going to be that impaired by this kind of weather, and we can still see drones like Lelekas and Orlans flying around in the skies completely fine, and they have no problems. And so I think that may be a bunch of hot air, as someone a little while ago in American history used to say. I think we're not seeing them anymore because the Russians have run out of them. But once again, we're not really sure because it's just a black hole in information there, and it could be anyone's guess. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next question goes to Ronald Schmidt, who says, how many Russians do you think are dying of hypothermia?
Probably about 24 of them a day. It's not going to be an incredibly high number, but it's still going to be a nice little gradual chipping away at every single unit out there. And also, you've got to remember that some of the front lines haven't gotten that cold. It's mostly the ones north of Bakhmut and the Soledar area and above that have gotten that cold. The rest of the front lines are still somewhat hospitable, around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving right along to the next one, we have a question from Plexus Gaming, who says, when do you think that the world will wake up to the genocide that Russia is trying to accomplish in Ukraine?
I don't think they ever really will, unless if it's in their direct threat. Like, for example, the United States didn't step in the Second World War or the First World War until the Lusitania was sunk in the First World War and Pearl Harbor happened in the Second World War. And we generally go about all wars like that. We always have to be attacked to ever do anything in the United States. That's part of kind of being a democracy in a way. And I think we'll just largely let it go by, because another thing that we also let just go by and we don't really do anything about is what's going on in China, and that's been going on for several years at this point, and no one's ever done anything about it. In fact, I think Disney went and filmed a movie just a couple of miles away from a place where some of the atrocities were happening. So I don't think, and I hate to sound pessimistic in this regard, but I don't think anyone's really going to step up and try and actively get involved in stopping this. The only thing we're going to do is try and support the Ukrainians and pray that through their resilience they're able to bear with it, which is really bad to say, but that's what we've seen. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Jarrett Moshenko, who says, Enforcer, do you think Russian orcs will be boiling their leather belts and boots by February to eat due to starvation and supply issues?
Yes, I think they will. I was waiting for someone to ask that one day. They certainly will. In case y'all don't know, eating leather shoes and stuff, that's no joke. People actually used to do that when they got starving enough. They would boil the leather and eat it because, it's better.
Why? Why?
It's better than nothing. Like what you like for example, during the siege of Leningrad, it became a common cuisine to eat wall paste. Like that's just normal in a way.
I think I'd go find some bugs before I started eating leather belt soup.
Can you eat leather? No, leather's made. It's got toxic crap in it, but you can eat it. Like I'm not kidding. People have actually eaten this before.
I mean, technically, you can eat anything. You can eat cyanide, but you might die.
Let's see. Look at this. Mash.com. Is leather actually edible? It seems uncommon. Well, that being said, it never hurts to know if you... Wait, hang on. Should you ever find yourself in a desperate situation, or maybe if you're ever just super bored, know that you can, in fact, eat leather. But there are some things you should know first. According to Favorite Leather, leather is absolutely edible. Leather largely contains 60 to 70% water and 30 to 35% protein, making it absolutely fine to eat. However, the best leather... I don't know why I'm talking like that Chills guy, number 15. But anyways...
that guy annoys me so much.
I know. That's why I was like, why am I doing that? That's just going to grate on people. But... However, the best leather to eat is the one not tanned. If you are in a dire situation, keep in mind that different items are tanned differently, and some are still edible. You can eat leather, and I think they will.
Oh, Lord. I'll keep that in mind next time I'm hungry.
Yeah, boy, I'm hungry. You just start eyeing the leather shoes.
I got my eyes on that quesadilla.
There's actually like some elves or dwarves or something in Icelandic Christmas culture, and I think one of them actually ate shoes according to the folk tales or something. So you always had to like keep your leather shoes near you or something in December. Otherwise, like a dwarf would come and eat your leather shoes or something. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at those guys. There was also one that licked spoons. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next.
All right. And up next, we have a question from David Erickson, who says, what's going on in the Black Sea with the Russian fleet?
What's going on in the Black Sea with the Russian fleet is that they occasionally patrol outside the port. Most of them are now in port, as far as we know, because, the Russians are kind of having a hard time supplying their land forces, and it's very difficult to supply most of these surface ships with the fuel to keep them running for months on end. And so we have largely seen that most of them are in port, not really doing much, and a couple of them are patrolling the openings of Ukraine, making sure that only grain shipments are making their way in. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well according to the knowledge we have. We don't have a lot of information on the Black Sea Fleet and what they're doing, so keep that in mind. But with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so with that, who is the lucky last person who got in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, and that viewer is LandDog89, who says, does the Ukraine have a foothold on the south side of the Dnieper River?
Yes, they do. We didn't talk about that today, but they do. We actually saw them raise a flag around here. it was pretty clear. The Ukrainian government actually put out that video, so apparently they're fine with it being doxed in a way, but it was right there. They crossed the river and they put up a flag. And from what we know, there's still Ukrainian forces over there, and we could see, although I didn't make a special mention of it today, that on the 3rd, just yesterday, they updated the map and they actually showed that the Russians aren't here. And that's because there's apparently some Ukrainian forces that went over there and saw that there's no one around at all anywhere in the vicinity. And so they have made it over there, and they're talking about that maybe showing that there's potential for the Ukrainians to start conducting operations on the southern bank of the Dnieper River. But they're not entirely sure yet, and I'm waiting to report on that until a couple of days, so that way some salty people out there can't go, hey, call him out, he's wrong, wah! But anyways, with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. We probably just gave that person some content to work with right there. But with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching. If y'all did enjoy, please make sure to hit the like button and also subscribe. We run these streams every single day of the week, except for Mondays, which means, just in case you are new, that means we will not be running tomorrow, but every other day of the week you can find us here at the exact same time of day at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all so much once again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. Slava Ukraini, long live the Lee Spring Army, and everyone have a great night. Good luck. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you all on Tuesday. Have a great night, and thank you all so much once again.
Good night.
Yes.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.
Усміхнеться доля, згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького